Let's just hope he didn't ask you to say some words for him, Todd. That might take all night, but just kidding. All right, we are moving on to
2.2, 2022 Intern Recognition.
Mayor Brzezinski, hey, it's that great time of year with our annual intern presentation. So this year, this is our 7th year. Thank you to the City Council for always funding the internship program. So it's our 7th year. We've had 105 paid interns over the years, and 12 of those interns have turned into full-time employees. And so this summer we have 10 so far, and I don't think all 10 are here, but we have several of them here along with their mentors, and they're going to come up and introduce themselves and talk about a little bit about what they did this year. So with that, here they come.
All right, we'll see. They got a plan to go first. All right, taking the lead.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. For those who don't know me, my name is Lieutenant Travis Spencer with the Police Department. I'd like to introduce to you Josh Berlin. Josh was our CSO intern over the course of the summer. He's going into his senior year at UND, and hopefully he's going to be one of our I'll let him explain a little bit about some of the things that he did over the course of the summer and some of his duties, and open it up to any other questions you might have. So thank you.
Hi. My biggest thing as a CSO this summer, I was out on the Greenway patrolling in uniform and everything. Other times I'd take calls that CSOs are responsible for, such as animal calls, parking complaints, found property stuff, just like that. It was a great experience. It was nice being in a uniform, having a badge and everything. I think it was really close, the closest you could get to like a law enforcement experience. And it was great to really experience that firsthand with the Grand Forks Police Department.
Good questions for him. He's prepared.
Well, yeah, how did you enjoy it? What'd you think? Are we going to have a future officer, lieutenant, chief on our hands here, or what's your thoughts?
Possibly. I really like Grand Forks. I mean, working for the PD here was really, I enjoy going to work every day. Like being on the Greenway, interacting with the people out there. Everyone seemed nice out there, so.
Sounds good. Well, thank you. Thank you for what you do.
Mayor Bochenski, members of the Commission, Javen Bedard, Grand Forks Public Health, Environmental Manager. We've really appreciated the intern program we had. We've had, this is our 4th intern. We've had one go on to obtain their credential as a registered sanitarian and work elsewhere. Another one is applying for jobs in our role as well elsewhere. And we look forward to the day we can keep one. Chelsea Timmerman is this year's intern, and I'll let her speak to what she's done. We really appreciate the work they do in helping us keep up on citizen concerns and be timely in response.
Like you said, I'm Chelsea Timmerman. I'm studying environmental studies and communication at UND. I helped out the environmental health department with addressing nuisance concerns, and I also worked with I shadowed on some health inspections as well as did some pest identification, and I've really enjoyed my time, and being able to step foot into the field for the first time has been a pretty cool experience, so it's been great.
I'll ask the question everybody wants to know. What is it like working for Javen?
It's been great. He knows so much about everything. He has an answer for everything all the time, so it's been good working with him. I like him a lot.
All right, good to hear. Anybody else, anything? All right, thank you. Good round of applause.
Good evening, City Council and Mayor. My name is Shannon LaHaye with the 911 Center PSAP, and I'm here with Adam Hansen, who was our intern this year. We've used the internship program 3 years in a row, and it's been valuable. We used it first for our marketing and training, and we've moved into the IT section of it, where Adam has carried on that for the 2nd year. And I'll let you explain a little bit more on how he has helped us with that in all of our systems.
Yes, I'm Adam Hansen. I'm studying data science at UND. So as part of the internship, I've been gathering a lot of the data there's many different data sources that the 911 center collects, and I've been trying to collect it so we can better utilize it in the future. And I've been writing instructions so that the normal employees, the maybe not so technically inclined people can understand how to do what I'm doing.
We could all probably use some of that. Well, thank you. I know PSAP's a tough department to get filled, so many ways you can bring efficiencies there. You're helping the whole city, so we appreciate the work you've done. So thank you.
Good evening, Mayor Boczynski and members of City Council. With me tonight is Grayson Cole. She's been an intern with the city for a little over a year now, and she's worked across all divisions of Public Works, sanitation, and our water division. And I will let her explain a little bit more of what she's been doing for us over the last year or so.
Hi, I'm Grayson Cole. I'm from Park River, North Dakota, and I am going to be a senior at UND. I study environmental studies and I minor in sustainability. And this summer I've been working on the lead service line replacement program, as well as mainly the lead service line inventory. And then I've also gotten to do a lot of public outreach in the stormwater department, as well as a little bit in the greenway. So it's been a great experience overall.
Thank you. And you helped out with the recycling, right? That
Yep.
was your first thing, so
Awesome.
appreciated that. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, members of Council. This is Holly Solvik. She has been with us for a couple months now. You wouldn't think the fire department would need a marketing social media intern, but we did. She has raised awareness in our department. Hopefully she'll have an impact on us getting some applications for the future. So I'll let Holly explain what she did.
Yep, I'm Holly Solvey. I'm a marketing major with a minor in leadership going into my senior year at UND. I've been working on recruitment videos, social media posts, and a few other training videos and stuff with the fire department. Originally from Forest Lake, Minnesota, and be ending my 4th year at UND here. So.
All right. Well, Deputy Chief, no offense to you, but she certainly brightens it up over there. We got over there for the budget period, which is nice to see. So.
She has fit in very well with everybody over there. So.
Oh, that's great to hear.
Kind of a little breath of fresh air.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, thank you.
Thanks, man.
'" Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Council members. My name is Lieutenant Jeremy Moe with Grand Forks Police Department's Investigation Bureau. Noelle Mara here, she came to us at the beginning of the summer and became an immediate team member for us, working alongside our detectives and helping with any initiatives or investigations that they may have. So I'll let her explain a little bit of what she's done, but she's been, like I said, an invaluable member, and it's a great partnership with UND.
Yeah, I'm Noelle. I'm currently going into my senior year at UND. I'm studying forensic science and psychology there. This summer I've been helping with data entry, timelines for the investigations, and then lastly I've just been kind of following around the detectives, helping in any way that I can as well.
All right. Well, we saved the best for last. All right. Well, thank you. Any other comments from the council? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I think it shows you it's always an exciting day year after year to have the interns come up here and they get put on the spot under the lights. So thank you everybody for all your hard work. We appreciate it. Maybe someday you'll be full city employees. We could sure use the help. So thank you. Why don't we give them one last round of applause for everybody.
2.3 is a proclamation, Grand City's Community Celebration, August 2nd, 2022.
This is good timing because I'll be over there tomorrow night, about 6 o'clock, I think. Proclamation, Grand City's Community Celebration, August 2nd, 2022. Whereas the Grand City's Community Celebration provides a unique opportunity for Grand Forks to join forces with thousands of other communities across the country celebrating community relation events and promoting community policing efforts. And whereas the City of Grand Forks plays a vital role in assisting the police through crime, drug, and violence prevention efforts, as well as support services to victims. Whereas it is essential that all citizens of Grand Forks be aware of the importance of crime prevention programs, community services available to assist people, and the impact that public's participation can have on reducing crime, drugs, and violence in this community through community policing efforts. And whereas police community partnerships, community services, awareness of community problems, and the cooperation are important themes of the Grand City's community celebration in bringing together the community services to provide holistic ways to reduce crime, drug use, and victimization. Therefore, as mayor of the City of Grand Forks, I do hereby proclaim August 2nd, 2022 as Grand City's Community Celebration 2022 in the City of Grand Forks, and encourage all citizens and organizations to join in this observation.
Moving on to 2.4, Red River Valley Water Supply Project Update.
Mr. Phelan.
Mayor Buczynski and members of the City Council, on the agenda tonight, we're going to provide an update, and Mr. Steve Burian from Burian and Associates is going to primarily give the update. As part of the agenda, there's two attachments. One's an overview, and we're not going to go through the overview this evening, and then the second part of the presentation is the actual model, and really demonstrating the need for the project, not only today, but as you look over the coming decades that we have. I'm just going to give you a quick overview and not go through the overview slides, but again, I sent you all a form editorial regarding the need for the project of the Red River Valley Water Supply Project. It certainly does provide a backup water supply for this region, for Fargo and Grand Forks and the greater region. Number two, it provides a great economic development tool for us. So we have been working really hard on this particular project. You're going to hear more and more about this particular project as we go through this fall and into the upcoming North Dakota legislative session. You're going to have in front of you what they call a PPA, or a project participation agreement. And within that agreement right now, we're reviewing a draft, and Mr. Gosted will get more involved in that. That's a 60-plus page agreement that's going to spell out all the specific terms for the City of Grand Forks. Cities of Fargo and others are going to have that too. The Lake Agassiz Water Authority will be reviewing that. So some of the details that are specified in that overview are going to matter, because a lot of those details will end up in that PPA agreement. So we're not going to go over that this evening, but as we come forward more and more, you'll be hearing more and more about the Red River Valley Water Supply Project. With that, Mr. Burian is going to go over really demonstrating the need for the Red River Valley Water Supply Project. We've been working on this for a long time. I think the important note is that we've really built up a lot of positive momentum. The state of North Dakota understands the need for the project, not only for Fargo, but for Grand Forks and the entire economy of North Dakota. So I think really, as we lead to the next session, it's one of our top priorities in Grand Forks. We're working really well with the City of Fargo and the metro area. And so lots of positive momentum building to fruition. And as we always want to do as part of the project, we're going to talk about with Mr. Burian, who's been a long time person on this project, has a lot of historical history on it, and even more important, a lot of really technical expertise. And so as we go through it, I think Mr. Burian will be able to demonstrate really the need for the project. I did also ask, we've been working with Fargo and the Garrison Diversion, who's kind of leading it on behalf of the state. I did ask Mr. Burian also to run a few more models. We've been running a model that's more conservative and looking at the year 2075, which is kind of the planning horizon for the project. So I requested that he would run kind of maybe of a bookend model that would be less conservative. And then I also asked him, because we always want to look at risk, and there's been a lot of discussion regarding raw water supply and what that may mean to Fufang or future industry, to try to run a model for current day and say, for instance, as Mr. Burian talks about, this could be a 10-year build of a project. How much risk do we have over the upcoming 10 years? And just so we can take a look at that. So he's going to show you 4 models, and there's no better person that we have in front of us to give us the overview than Mr. Burian. So with that, I'd hand it over to Mr. Burian.
Thank you, Todd, for that positive introduction. Mayor Buczynski, President Sandy, members of the City Council. As Todd noted, my name is Steve Burian. I'm the President and CEO of Burian Associates. I have been working with the City of Grand Forks on water supply issues since 1990, and indirectly or directly on this particular project since 1995. So I do have this water project in my blood, and I'll do my best to provide an overview this evening. Todd mentioned that you had two presentations that were sent out before the meeting. The agenda items in green are all the ones that are covered in the first presentation, and then Todd has asked me to focus on the current and ongoing modeling efforts and then provide a summary of the presentation, assuming that the background information is out there should you have questions. When we look at the current and ongoing modeling efforts, I think initially it's important to understand how Grand Forks gets its water supply. You actually have three different water supplies. You have an intake on the Red River with a seniority of 1957. You have water stored behind Bald Hill Dam at Lake Ashtabula, which is north of Valley City, and that has a permit date of 1963. You would get that water by requesting the Corps of Engineers to open the dam gates, release water into the Cheyenne River at Valley City. It would then flow down to Lisbon, back up to Fargo, and eventually hit the Red River. That dam was built specifically after the 1930s because of the devastating drought we had in North Dakota. The last permit that you have, and this is one that has changed in importance over the years, is the Red Lake River permit. That's actually a Minnesota water permit because that river lies in Minnesota until it hits the red and forms the forks for which we're named. That permit doesn't really have a seniority date. It has a date of application, and given its water quality, you try to use about 90% of your water from the Red Lake River currently, and then switch to the Red River after that. And so that's become your primary water supply after counting on the red as your primary supply for years. This is the project we'll be referring to. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail. The idea for this project is to either provide a water supply during drought or to provide additional industrial water supply for the region, because most of the water supplies in the Red River Valley have been fully appropriated. Its intent is to build an intake on the Missouri River over by Washburn, which is about 40 miles straight north of Bismarck. It would then be conveyed through a pump station to break tanks on the hill about halfway through the project, and then it would flow by gravity down to the Cheyenne River, ultimately into Lake Ashtabula, and it would be a way to refill that storage that you currently have permitted. It's going to be a really long pipe, 167 miles. It's going to be 6 feet in diameter, so about my height. And so you can imagine that this is a very significant water supply infrastructure that's being built. I'm going to talk about Lake Ashtabula, or what we call Lake A, quite a bit. I mentioned that it was built after the 1930s to address water supply. If you look at the different colored bands, those are the 5 people that helped pay for Lake Ashtabula and have an appropriation behind it. And as crazy as this sounds, because North Dakota is first in time and first in right, and because your check was received first, you have the most senior appropriation on Lake Ashtabula, so you have that bottom chunk there, which would be the most reliable. And then West Fargo, Valley City, and Lisbon also have stored water there. It's a little bit hard to discern, but you also see those yellow lines on there. That's the way the Corps of Engineers manages this. So the state of North Dakota manages the water supply, but the Corps manages the reservoir. And they don't really care so much about exactly whose water is in there. They look at it for flood control, which is the top slice, water supply, which is that slice that I show in green with the green arrow. Fish and wildlife conservation is the next slice, and then there is a dead pool there where there would be a little bit of water that you can't get out. The whole intent of the Red River Valley Water Supply Project in its most simplistic fashion is to build a pipeline from the Missouri River over to this reservoir, and then when you guys use your Red River and you use your Red Lake River and it's time to call for water out of Lake Ashtabula, the project would in essence backfill that water that's stored here so that you could keep releasing it throughout the drought period and provide a consistent water supply for the city of Grand Forks and other users. When we do all of this work, we had to figure out how would we keep track of all that, and so we opted for a model called State Mod. It was actually picked out by the Bureau of Reclamation back in 2000, and it's been used for the last 22 years. It's the model that Colorado uses for all of its water allocations, and if you are familiar with the Denver area and the different metro areas in Colorado, very drought susceptible. Lots of reservoirs and pipelines built all over the state to supply water, and so it's actually a much more sophisticated system than what we have to deal with, but it ended up being a very good model for us to use. Some have asked, how vetted is this model? The Bureau started using it in 2000. Another group of consultants tackled it in 2015, and then our firm and Wilson Water Group out of Denver have been tackling another run at it in 2022. So we're gaining a lot of confidence with the model that we set up for this project. And this model can track the water from the Missouri River all the way through the pipeline, through the reservoir, and through the river system. So at any time when there's water flowing past Grand Forks, we'll essentially color that water and know where that water came from and whose water it is. As we look at why the big question that the Red River Valley Water Supply Project is trying to answer is, will there be adequate water in the 1930s to meet future demands? And Todd indicated that the future as we describe it now is 2075. The intent was to have a 50-year planning horizon with some planning time ahead of that. So if you go to 2025 and add 50 years, that's why we're looking that far in the future. It's probably a 100-year asset, but some people struggle looking 50 years in the future, so it's probably irresponsible to look much longer than that. The other thing we'll be looking at tonight is 2015 demands. We had that data set already compiled. We looked at the 2021 data for the different users, and the demands were almost identical in 2021 to 2015, and so we didn't reestablish that data set. So whenever I talk about 2015 tonight, that really is the current water supplies that we're dealing with. What I'm going to talk about tonight is two scenarios under two different situations. So there'll be a conservative scenario and a less conservative scenario looking at the 2075 water demands or 50 years in the future. We'll also look at a conservative scenario and a less conservative scenario for 2015 demands, which is intended to be the current demands. And to those 2015 demands, we have added the Red River Biorefinery and your proposed Fufeng. So those two major industrial water demands have been added to everything that I call 2015 tonight. Before I get into Grand Forks, Todd Phelan, City Administrator, asked me to just provide a little bit of color on Fargo. Fargo is the largest metro area that's going to rely on the project. Fargo provides all of West Fargo's water as well as all the urbanized water for Casserole Water. So it's a major metro area, and it is upstream of us. And then Fargo also has a senior permit on the Red River to Fargo. We're the 7th highest in Grand Forks, and Fargo is the 3rd highest. When Fargo is very similar to Grand Forks in that it has 3 different cascading water supplies. It relies on the Red River as its primary supply. It has an intake on the Cheyenne River and can use its permits as well as West Fargo's. And then they have water stored in Lake Ashtabula, which is called the Thompson-Ocker water. That's, whenever you hear Thompson-Ocker, that's the natural flow stored behind Bald Hill Dam. We're looking at 2075 demands. In this case, we're looking at the project not being built. We're looking at Lake Ashtabula cannot be drained, and so when I showed you that profile of the lake, we can use that green arrow there, but we're assuming in this particular run that the Corps of Engineers would not drop below the top of the Fish and Wildlife pool. They'd keep that water for other purposes. And then Fargo, when asked, realized that they'd have to turn off the red before they took that river all the way down to 0, just practically, so they could call for water from Lake Ashtabula and have sufficient travel time for it to get to the city. They also have a minimum bypass on their Cheyenne River intake. If we were to look at this scenario compared to the two that I'm going to describe for Grand Forks, this would be Fargo's conservative scenario. This is a graphic then that shows water demands on the y-axis or the vertical axis, and it shows time for the 1930s drought, which is our worst drought of record in the design event for the Red River Valley Water Supply Project. All of the colors other than black show Fargo using either their Red River water, their Cheyenne River water, or some of West Fargo's water, and then the black shows shortages. So you can see that if we superimpose future demands, 2075 demands, over a 1930s drought event, there's going to be very serious water supply shortages in Fargo, North Dakota. I was asked earlier what was Fargo's population in 1930. It was about 28,000 people. In terms of planning for 2075, they're planning for somewhere between 300 and 425,000 people. So the complexion has changed considerably since the 1930s. People also ask, well, okay, the 30s, how bad does it get otherwise? This is a graphic over the entire period of record, and you can see that if we superimpose 2075 demands over the period of record, it would be expected that Fargo would have a shortage and a drought similar to the early 60s. They'd have a pretty significant shortage in the mid-70s if we had a drought like that, and they'd have a pretty significant shortage in the 80s. But the 1930s, when we talk about the dirty 30s, you can see how much worse they were than any droughts that we've experienced in our lifetime. So let's move into the first two scenarios for Grand Forks. Remember, this is one conservative and one non-conservative. This is for 2075 demands, so these first two are going to be looking way out in the future, or a 50-year planning horizon. The difference between the conservative and the less conservative is for the conservative, we looked at no Red Lake River water being available. There's a low flow plan that's been adopted by the Corps of Engineers, and under their plan, it looks like there'll be very little to no water available during the 1930s for the city of Grand Forks. And so what we modeled under one scenario is none. Under the other scenario, we modeled those very low flows just to show you the difference. Under one scenario, we assumed that the Corps was going to hold on to the water in Lake Ashtabula and not release any water outside of that green area that I showed you earlier. Under the other scenario, we assumed that the Corps at some point, and I think this is probably practical, would realize that a person is more important than a fish, and would most likely, and that's probably not so professional, but you get my point, would likely release water in that fish and wildlife pool, but we know that it would take time and quite a bit of politics to achieve that. And then lastly, just like Fargo plans to bypass 40 CFS of water if it's available on the red, we picked a number for modeling purposes under the conservative scenario of 23 CFS for Grand Forks. Under the less conservative option, we assume that you would use all water that was flowing over Riverside Dam, and because you have that low head dam and your intakes behind it, you physically can do that. You can use every drop of water that's flowing in the river, given that pool that you've formed. If you look at the results for the conservative approach, now remember there's no red on here because we can't use the Red Lake River under this scenario. You can see that primarily using Red River water, you're using some return flows from Fargo and a little bit of water from Lake A. You actually, even though you have the senior permit on Lake A, when we assume that the fish and wildlife pool is going to remain full, Fargo's demands hits and shortages hit so much sooner than yours that they essentially use up the reservoir quicker than you, even though you're the senior permittee. And we call that getting trapped in Lake Ashtabula. And then the black is the shortage that we project that you'd have under our more conservative approach. If you're one that likes numbers better than graphics, you can see in the second column the amount of acre feet of shortage. Probably doesn't mean much to you. An acre foot is 1 foot of water over an entire acre. It's a common unit when you look at water supply. You can see that 34 and 36 tend to be your worst years, with a projected shortage of between 49% and 69%. So we're talking about a very significant shortage. I mentioned that this is a graph of river flow, the Red River downstream of your intake in 2075 compared to the 1930s drought. And you can see that there's a common line there at 23, where oftentimes when it's low, it's at 23, but you can see it dips below 23 at times because we're not providing a minimum flow of 23. We're just having you to turn off the red to a different supply at 23. And you can see how close we are to the nice edge of more shortages here, where you can see that you touch zero quite a few times over the drought of 1930s, but you don't really hit a point where it flatlines at that drought, or at that zero. Similar to Fargo, we did want to show you the entire period of record, and for you, other than a real small black line that's probably almost indiscernible on the graphic here in 1976, you can see that otherwise the 1930s are really the drought that Grand Forks has to be weary of. And so when you talk about it, looking toward the next 10 years, you'd only be in a pinch if you got to the point where the 1930s were the environmental effects that you had over the next 10 years based on historical performance in the rivers. If we switch then to the less conservative approach, so remember under this approach now we're using that 23 CFS, we're assuming we can drain Lake Ashtabula all the way to the bottom, and we're assuming that some Red Lake River water is available. You can see that the black goes away to a large degree, where you see some red probably not at the critical time, so I don't think that assumption is the critical one, but you can see that the green is your Lake Ashtabula water, so if the Corps does let you go below that magic threshold, you can see you fill in quite a bit of the black with Lake A water, but you do still have projected shortages even under the less conservative model in 1936 and 1937. And you can also see the depth of that is all the way down to the bottom. And so if you look at a year, your shortage won't be that bad over the course of the year. But if you look at a month, there are some months where you just don't have any water flowing in the river under a 2075 scenario. So looking way out in the future. If you like the numbers again, you can see that for most years you don't have any problems. But in 36, you'd be about 9% short of your water supply based on the model and 20% short. And that's for a population projection, I should have mentioned this earlier, of between 60 or 80,000 and 120,000, with the average being somewhere in the range of 97,000 people by 2075, including East Grand Forks. One of the downsides of the less conservative model, as you can see, this is river flows over time during the 1930s, and you can see on this graphic, if you just focus on the zero as your main concern, you can see now there's times under the less conservative approach where you don't just touch zero, but you spend quite a bit of time at zero. This suggests that, obviously if the demands were more than what we're showing, the problem would end up being quite a bit worse. You also can graph the Red Lake River now that we're assuming it's available. You can see the bottom segment there is only 10 CFS, and so which is equivalent of about 6 million gallons per day, if that's more familiar to you. And so you can see for most of the 30s drought, the Corps anticipates there'd be very little water available from the Red Lake. This shows over the course of time, and so it's that same 1930s data with the black line that you see, and then no other shortages projected under the less conservative approach where you're using the water more assertively. The next two runs now are exactly the same thing, but instead of looking at 2075 demands, we're looking at current demands plus Fufeng and the Red River Biorefinery. So it's the same three assumptions under the conservative approach, the same three assumptions under the less conservative approach, but now our water demands have been ratcheted back from 53 years ago to what we think we would have today if Fufeng were in place. Under the conservative scenario where we're saving some of our water supplies, you can see that the black is much less frequent than we projected in 2075, and if you look back at the magnitude is much less aggressive as well, but we do project some problems, particularly in 34, 35, and 36, 37, as well as some smaller ones in the out years. If you like the data, we don't project any shortages in the near term, but we do project a shortage of 41% in 34, and then again 36% in 1936, if a 1930s drought started today and we didn't do any major curtailment of your water demands. This shows what the flows would be in the river. We're again turning off at 23. You can see it's not quite as aggressive in terms of touching zero, but in that 36, 37 period, we do hit a zero once during the 10-year modeling period. If you're interested, okay, that's the 1930s. How about current day demands superimposed over the rest of the record? And I guess the reassuring thing here is if you had current day demands plus Fufeng plus the Red River Biorefinery, our model does not project that there'd be any shortages in the rest of the period record, just the 10-year event of the 1930s. This one's going to take me a moment. Todd and Sean Gaddy asked me to try to take a stab at this. What I'm graphing here is the projected shortages that you'd have during that period of time using the conservative model, and that's on the vertical axis, and then that 1930s event on the x-axis. And then the dark blue is your phase 1 drought plan, phase 2 is light blue is phase 2, phase 3 is green, phase 4 is yellow, and phase 5 is pink or salmon maybe. And you can see that because the river, when it is low, gets really low, you can't conserve your way out of this problem, but recognize this is the conservative option. So if you look up in that upper text box, I think there's some things you do to address this. First of all, I think you'd start using some of that 23 CFS bypass, which would make a major dent in this. I think you'd use you'd request water from the Corps of Engineers from either the Red Lake Dam, which is what they did in 2021 for you, or Lake A, where you drop below that green band. You could look at curtailing some of your industrial demands. You could, if you were desperate, use some of the water stored behind Riverside Dam. And then many communities are starting to recycle wastewater, not for domestic purposes, but for industrial purposes, and that would be another option should you have something this severe. So although those graphics demonstrate that in some months you'd be 100% short of water, I think there are quite a few ways in the conservative model that you could work your way out of that if you had to in near-term situation. Conversely, this is model 4, and I tried to scenario 4, and I put them back to back for a reason. If we take all of that conservatism away and look at the less conservative approach, you can see in this case we show no shortages projected for the near term. Instead, we have some water being provided by the Red Lakes. We have quite a bit of water being provided by return flows from Fargo using Lake Ashtabula, and then we have your use of Lake Ashtabula, and nowhere on here in the near term, if you go to the less conservative approach, do we anticipate that you'd have water shortages. If we're wrong, however, recognize that we've been pretty assertive in how we've used the water, and so your last couple bullets that would be available would be reduced industrial demands, and as well as that wastewater reuse, because most of the other strategies have already been implemented in the less conservative approach. This just shows the obvious that we don't have any shortages during that period. You can see that the river does get down to 0 quite a bit if you were to go to the more or the less conservative approach, and so that's something else to be aware of. Red Lake River still is very problematic, whether it's 2075 or 2015 demands. If we look at the long term, if you don't have any shortage in the 30s, it's intuitive that you won't have shortages over the other time periods. And so that really summarizes the difference between scenario 1 and 2 and scenario 3 and 4. Just very briefly, what about the project? And so with the project, we have the benefit of bringing all kinds of water to Grand Forks. And so in this case, we stayed very conservative. We've looked at no Red Lake River water. We've looked at maintaining that fish and wildlife pool. We're superimposing 2075 or the long-term demands over the drought period. And we're also looking at keeping that 23 CFS bypass so we have some flow in the river at all times. And essentially what that project does is the big pipeline fills Lake Ashtabula. In this case, Fargo requests the water, and you really never even have to ask for project water. You just have to be prepared to pay for project water that Fargo's already brought to the Red River Valley. That's what's shown in green here. If you look at the river, and remember that we're bypassing 23 CFS now because we have enough water to do that, the river never dips below that 23 CFS, and that would still be a very low flow in Grand Forks, but you'd see water trickling over the Riverside Dam, and you'd have a much healthier environment and aesthetically much more pleasing in Grand Forks as well. As you approach that project participation agreement that Todd referenced that they hope to sign by year end, there are some trade-offs that are being made by Grand Forks and Fargo as you looked at that green that I showed you on this graphic right here. Basically, Fargo uses the water quite aggressively, which then allows Grand Forks to always have water. We just had a big meeting with both communities, and they feel that that's a really good trade-off, and because what it does, it allows the project to be smaller. It allows the cost of the project to be lower. Grand Forks really never has to request water, but they do let Fargo use a little bit of what they've nominated for once to cover that. And then because we're storing water in that lake behind Bald Hill Dam at Valley City, if we're wrong and the drought is worse than the 1930s, we would have some of that water available that's trapped in Lake Ashtabula to potentially send down as an emergency supply. To sum all this up, and I'm going to go through this carefully because I put a lot of thought into this, based on the period of record, there appears to be ample water flowing by the city of Grand Forks except during periods of extreme drought. The Red River Valley Water Supply Project is planned to address this extreme drought. Prior to the Red River Valley Water Supply Project being constructed, drought management, demand reduction, and other mitigation strategies will be important. The Red River Valley Water Supply Project is under construction, and the project team is working diligently towards its completion. Grand Forks is currently considering its appropriate nomination for the Red River Valley Water Supply Project, given your growth and given some of the industrial interest that you have in the community. And as Todd mentioned, a project participation agreement, and I think it's actually 80 pages, you maybe undersold it at 60, has been developed with the goal of Grand Forks commitment by year end. With that, that concludes what I hope to present this evening, and I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Brand, for a very thorough report. Open up to any council members that have any questions for Mr. Brand or want any more clarification on any of those items? No? Mr. Bean, yeah, please.
Having seen this for the first time, I'd like to have a little time to be able to digest this. I have a few concerns that need to be identified and noted. And personally, it's a surprise, okay? I'm the city's representative on Lake Agassiz Water Authority, where I'm vice chair. I'm on the Grand Forks County representative of Garrison Diversion, and I've been working on the project since 2000. So I have a wealth of knowledge on this thing here, so I'd like to use that knowledge to take a look at what has just been presented. There's a lot of things I've seen before, there's no question about it. I'm very concerned about what's considered conservative versus less conservative, as far as what is standard, what you would normally use, because the conservative approach is the design approach of the whole project that's been taken to date. But I can't necessarily respond to everything that was stated, Steve. But I'd like to have that opportunity to do that and report back to the council again as the council's representative, at least on Lake Agassiz Water Authority, plus the other background that I bring. But I've not seen it and have difficulty responding. I did want to make sure, I did think this did a fair job of representing the truth about water supply for Grand Forks. There's more to be said on that. The original study that was presented back in February looked at water supply based on average flow, which is not, I don't know where that comes from. I need to understand that a little bit more, so I'll probably need to ask questions. And I will tell you, water supply for the city of Grand Forks is extremely important. We can't ignore it, and we have to understand how precious it is, and that we have to make sure that we maintain that importance for us. And whether if this does that or not, I'm not sure, but having worked in water for almost 40 years and had this level of experience here, I think I would like to be able to express that opinion to what's going on. There's no way I can take it on after just seeing this for the first time. It wasn't shared with me in advance. So I just got to leave it like that because I don't know what else to do. I'm not taking sides. This is nothing. All I'm trying to do, and I will state this for sure, is make sure we make informed decisions based on facts. That's all I'm trying to accomplish. So,
Mayor Bochansky and council members, I was the one who asked Mr. Burian to run these additional models, and we did run them up till about 3 o'clock this afternoon and did load them in. So this is not, I did say that we were going to plan a presentation so you kind of get a snapshot of where we're at. I didn't want to go through all the overview slides because otherwise we'd be here for another half hour. So the intent is that you're going to have a lot more opportunities at committee of the holes and at city councils to further review this. Ultimately, we're going to ask you to sign up for as part of a partnership agreement as we move forward, similar to what Fargo is doing. So really, this is a snapshot. And then all we know today with all these models is that we're not completely right. And we all care about water and what we're doing. And I think really what the last slides are the most important slides. We need to be part of the Red River Valley Water Supply Project. It will protect us for the next 100 years. The project is not coming around again in North Dakota. And the bottom line is that I think as Steve really showed well, Fargo and the Grand Forks Metros really need to partner well together. And if we do, our next 100 years are going to be quite fruitful with that. So this really isn't intended that we're going to answer all the questions. It's really intended to give you a snapshot on where we're at. And there's going to be a lot more details to come. And Mr. Beer, you'll be seeing a lot of Mr. Beer in the future, along with other folks as we work through that 80-page document that'll have a lot of exhibits, similar to what you saw with the development agreement.
All right. Any further comments for now for Mr. Beering?
I would just respond that the last committee of the whole meeting, I did suggest that we talk about this and get into depth, because I think this is a much larger issue than we've talked about to date, so I look forward to having more conversation. There's definitely some things that need to be further discussed. So that's more to come, and I appreciate it, Mayor, if we can make that happen, because there is.
Thank you, Mr. Bean. President Sandy, please.
I'm happy to talk about this right now. I think we should. We have our consultant here that is also, I believe you're a water expert, aren't you, Mr. Bryan? Have you been doing water for a while?
Expert's a tough word, but I've been at it.
Well, so let's talk about, so I think Mr. Veen is concerned about our less conservative scenarios. Let's just talk about our more conservative scenarios. Because our more conservative scenarios are the scenarios that you're most concerned about, correct? They would have to be, because there's no water then.
Except they're not conservative. They're the actual scenarios we would design to. I take a little bit of an exception to conservative versus non-conservative or less conservative.
Well, I think, so let's talk about that then. The model we're running is without Red Lake River or any access to Lake Ashtabula. And there's no water in the Red River. I don't know how much more conservative we can be than that, because there's no water, right?
So, Mayor Buczynski, President Sandy, Ken Vian, Mr. Vian, Councilmember Vian, you're absolutely right, Ken, that when we go to build the project, all of the assumptions that we use in the conservative model for the no project are the same. But the difference in the for project or with project is we can build infrastructure to achieve all of those assumptions. So we put enough water into the reservoir so that we don't have to dip below the Fish and Wildlife pool. We put enough water in that if we need 23 CFS to bypass, we can do that. We put enough water in that if the Red Lake River is not available, we have enough water for that. And so what we did on the conservative model, and you provided help with that, is on the conservative model, we made all those same assumptions under the situation where there is no water backfilling Lake Ashtabula. Now, from a practical standpoint, if we get to that point where we have a shortage and we don't have any codified reason or contracted or mandated reason to bypass 23 CFS, I'm guessing Freddie is going to turn the intake on and use some of that 23 CFS. If we can reach the core and they indeed put a human over a fish on the amount of water in Lake Ashtabula, I don't think it's going to come exactly when we want it or on the quantities we want it, but I do think even they've told us that they'll probably start draining down that reservoir a little bit to meet the human needs. They'll be very clear that you've gone to some strict conservation. They'll be very sure that you've looked at every other approach to doing it, but I think that is practical. So, whether conservative is the absolute appropriate word, I'm not going to argue that. I'm not an English major. But from the standpoint of are there conservative elements built into that, I think there absolutely are.
I think through the time of data that we have, the doomsday scenario is a 30-style drought, right? We're walking across the Red River, right? Slides, if I recall correctly, looking at it, slides 12 through 21, your first two scenarios, are assuming that the population of Grand Forks has grown to 100,000-ish, you already mentioned that, and that essentially under that situation, we still only run out of water if it's a doomsday scenario, if there's no water. Is that correct? Yes. So we can look at all the scenarios we want. We can look at less conservative scenarios. I think Mr. Veen's point is 100% correct. We should look at the doomsday scenario and under a doomsday scenario, there's no water. Well, how are we going to mitigate that? The only way to do that is with the Red River Valley Water Supply Project, and I think we're all on board, and the city has said we have to move forward with that to guarantee that if we have a 30-style drought, we need to have water from the Missouri River to mitigate that. And with that, we will be doing all sorts of other things, including we won't be watering our grass. I'll be showering more than, or less than every day. Well, whatever, you know, I mean, you name it. And our industrial users will not be running their taps because there isn't enough water for it. Do you agree with those concepts? Because those are our measures. We have phase 1 through 5 mitigation efforts that if we were in a 30-style drought, we would be implementing.
The only exception I'd take, President Sandy, is that I do think with the project, you'd hope not to get to 4 and 5 in your drought, and so I think you'd certainly ask people to go to odd even sprinkling. Sure. I think you'd ask them to go to once a week sprinkling, but I think you'd hopefully try to make sure that you could preserve the turf from year to year and provide some reasonable amount of industrial water if there's a crop for them to process. That's the intent of the project, but it wouldn't be like trying to fill up a church on Christmas or Easter.
Sure, certainly. But again, under these scenarios, what's more than likely would be there would be some water in the Red Lake River, and they would say, okay, we're going to sacrifice the fish in Lake Ashtabula, and they will, because they're not going to value fish over human life, and they will say, okay, let's run her dry. And in that scenario, there's only 2 years where we have a shortage of water in a 30-style drought, what's going to reasonably happen. My question to you, you're an expert, Steve, if we implement phases 1 through 4 in a reasonable amount of time, are we going to be able to mitigate those 2 years where we have a 9 and 20% shortage on water?
Mayor Buczynski, President Sandy, provided you're willing to use up some of the conservatism that we had between scenarios 3 and 4, it's my professional judgment that with the current water demands you have, you would be okay. Fargo would be in a more of a predicament.
I'm happy to have more conversations about this, but I think the number one step we have to do is convince our state legislature to fully fund the Red River Valley Water Supply Project because it needs to be done. And although it needs to be done in a 3 in 1,000 year scenario for the city of Grand Forks, it needs to be done for the city of Fargo desperately, because Fargo has half of the water that we have and double our population, and they're growing dramatically faster than we are. And so this project needs to be done for the biggest economic engine in our state. Thank you, Mr. Beer.
All right, any further comments for Mr. Burrian on item 2.4?
I'll just have one last comment here. As long as we can continue the discussion, we have to, I guess I think of, and the reason why I go back to conservative versus less conservative is if you look at what's happening in Lake Mead, you look at what's happening in Salt Lake, Great Salt Lake, and you see what's happening with these things. I don't think the 30s is conservative. I think it is the appropriate what we should be designing for, if not more. And I think that the issues that we've talked about with Red Lake and what's going to happen with Lake Ashtabula and the access to that water, and having that water actually get here, it's 40 days to get here, and then you got to get it into the intake. If you start looking at all of that details to a little bit higher level, there are a lot of issues that need to be understood. And I guess in the end, and you'll find this in most of my comments, is I need to understand the data, the technical part, and I think then we need to look at what risks we're willing to take on, because a lot of this needs to be identified around the risk.
Yeah, please. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think so then we should address the risk. What is our actual risk in Grand Forks? Our risk, because I'm going to assume that we're going to be successful and we're going to get the Red River Valley Water Supply Project implemented. The state of North Dakota will come to their senses and fully fund it so that the largest economic engine in our state can continue to water their people. And then the city of Grand Forks will be fine because there will be plenty of water flowing to Grand Forks. Our risk then is today, our risk is we go into a 30-style drought today before it's finished getting constructed. So I'm going to conservatively say, I'm hoping that it's done in 10 years. I see our risk is today for the next 10 years, because in 10 years, there would be plenty of water. So I think when we start talking about addressing risk, we need to use logic and actually put some assessment to, okay, if our risk is a 30-style drought, what are the odds we're actually going to come into a 30-style drought in the next 10 years? So, Mr. Buren, how are we in a wet cycle or a drought cycle, and are there any indicators to show that we're going to go into a drought of the severity of the worst drought on record?
So Mayor Baczynski, President Sandy, I'm glad I'm not answering this question a year ago in terms of how severe the drought was of 1921 and 2021, how similar that looked to 1929. But if you'll remember, in August, you were at phase 2, Fargo was at phase 3, Moorhead was at phase 3, and then it rained a little bit in August, and then it rained a bunch in October. So when we ended the year of 2021, our reservoirs were full and we were in a non-drought situation. And then we've had lots of rain this year, and so statistically, it would take us some time to get back to that 2021 period, and then that was only like 1929. We'd have to have the ensuing, 5 years or 11 years in order to get to that 1930s drought. We do know that North Dakota has shown a trend, even looking at tree rings, of having a drought or a flood every 30 years. And that's not super scientific. The R-squared correlation isn't great, but if you look at the cycles, we tend to have that type of cycle, and nobody knows why. And we did have our 80s drought end in 92, and our wet period started in 93. And so the only one downside is we're probably due for a drought at some point, but we're certainly not in one today.
So, Mr. Mayor and Mr. Gusted, I know that our industrial users, current industrial user we've been talking to, future industrial users, will have a utility services agreement with them, correct?
That's part of the development agreement, is that's a condition that we enter into a utility service agreement for raw water use.
And I believe that we've been talking about several occasions that we will have the capability to turn off the water to those industrial users should we get into a 30-style drought, or even a drought, a 2021 style drought for that matter.
I would expect the terms of that agreement would include that very contingency.
Sure. So this whole discussion about the Red River Valley Water Supply Project has nothing to do with our industrial water user whatsoever. Not at all. This is 100% about making sure that we're able to mitigate for a flood in the future. They happen to be a user, all of our industrial users happen to be users, and as am I when I go home and flush my toilet. Managing that is how, through the utilities agreement, is how we make sure that we don't have issues with water supply for people that need drinking water. So I don't see, thank you, Mr. Buren. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mayor. I think I've made my point.
All right, thank you, President Sandy. Other further comments by other council members? All right, we appreciate your time, Mr. Buren, and look forward to some future conversations. Moving on to 3, public hearings and second readings of ordinances.
3.1, public hearing and second reading of an ordinance relating to electric scooters.
Thank you. Why don't we start, I'm just going to start with opening the public hearing. So if there's anyone here to speak on the electric scooter ordinance tonight, feel free to come up to the mics. All right, the public hearing period's closed, so I'm going to open it up for conversation with the council. Anyone would like to speak on the scooter ordinance? Mr. Weigel, please.
My intent is to support this, but I'd ask the council if we could make 2 changes with some guidance from Mr. Gosted. First change to the ordinance, I'd like to lower the age of to address some concerns by Ms. Osowski relating to children using these. I propose we lower the age to age 10. The state of North Dakota's age of culpability is 10 years old. Somebody under the age of 10 cannot be charged with a crime So I'd ask that we lower it to age 10, and then maybe redefine the scooter for this purpose that would have a minimum speed of 10 miles an hour. Would fall in.
So, yeah, I think your intent then is to, you want to, someone that buys an electric scooter at home and uses it on their street has the availability. I still think, yeah, the agreement with Bird scooters themselves and those types of things need to be someone with a driver's license. Is that kind of your intent? You're not intending to have 10-year-olds use Bird scooters, I'm assuming?
Not ideally.
Okay.
But, I mean, if they're under the guidance of their parents, then that's a choice their parents can help make for them.
Mr. Gosted, please, if you got your...
I can, just so that the council is aware, the change would be at the ordinance that's 8-1803. It's on page 1, subsection 3. So instead of 12, it would be 10 years of age is where that change would be made. And then with respect to the electric scooter and the 10 mile an hour minimum, I guess, it would be at Ordinance 21-1301, subsection 1, which is on page 4. It would read that, which is powered by an electric motor propelled at least 10 miles an hour, but no more than 15 miles an hour, where that change would exist, that what Mr. or Councilmember Weigel had suggested. The only other change is, and we left this open at the last meeting, and this is at 21-13-10, subsection 15, which is on page 10, the maximum number of electric scooters that a electric scooter company could have within the city. Bear in mind that the number that would actually be allowable would be established through the permitting process. We would just have a cap for an electric scooter company. And I think at the last meeting it was, I think Mr. Cavuto had suggested a 400 or 450 number as far as the maximum number of electric scooters that would be available as suggested number.
Okay. Any further comments or motions from council? Mr. Kamani, please.
I have a question on page 10. We talk about looking at item number 13 and item number 16. So we look at parking, and I can wait a few. So we look at parking, and we say that the city will be reimbursed for any costs should the operator not remove the vehicle from an inappropriately parked space, given 3 hours from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Sunday, and then if not, all other times by 10 a.m. the following calendar day. So how are we planning on policing that? So if it isn't picked up, do we have, is it a community officer that's going to go and is that someone that's designated to pick up the ones that aren't retrieved? And then it says here that we can revoke the license or revoke the permit, but do we have, you break the rules 3 times, it's kind of gray, right? So do we want a hard and fast, if you don't respond 10 times in a rolling 30-day period, you lose your license? Or my concern is just where are these going to be laid, and we need real incentive or punishment for putting them in the inappropriate places.
I can answer the question with respect to who would pick. I would expect that somebody would report this, either City Hall, and more likely direct the police officers or somebody to go in and gain possession of the misplaced scooters. As far as the, I thought there was a provision in here, and I could find it with respect to the number of times that they've violated. Yeah, if I take a look at, it's on page 8. It's subsection 21-1308, 1I, and it talks about if there's a documented history of violating the terms and regulations of this article. For example, if there's 5 or more scooters impounded by the city at any one time, that would give rise to a permit revocation. Or if there has had 10 or more electric scooters impounded within a 30-day time period, that would give rise to the ability to remove their permit as well. Or if the electric scooter rental operator leaves a scooter impounded for 10 or more consecutive days. So if they don't pick it up, then we could terminate their permit.
And Bird is aware of these terms and they're willing to accept that?
Correct. Yep, we reviewed this with them, so.
Perfect. Thank you.
The one other, if I don't mind, Mayor, I wanted to also advise you that I've had communications with the city of Bozeman, who has an electric scooter system. They sent us their materials and reviewed it. Our permitting process is much more detailed, much more thorough than what they've got. But what they advised me of was that they had a company that had come in before. They had some problems with that particular company. And then Bird Scooter came in, and they've been very cooperative, and they had good things to say about Bird when I had the communication with their city attorney, so.
Mr. Phelan, has there been any other scooter companies, electric bike companies that have come forward with interest in setting up something in the city, or is Bird really the only one? And did that come forward from the university, or were you aware of how that genesis was?
Yeah, Mayor Wachenski and members of the city council, number one, they do have an agreement with UND, and so they're really wanting to get moving forward, prior to the school year starting yet. They're the only ones that have contacted us. We did speak with Bird, and I'm not going to say they don't have competitors, but probably in this upper Midwest region, they are kind of the service provider. I also did speak with the city of Bismarck, who's had a 2-year run now with Bird, and I asked if they've had any follow-ups from any other companies, and they have not. Bird's been the only one. So it seems like, at least for the near term, Bird's going to be our sole provider.
All right, any further comments? Mr. Weigel, please.
Mayor Bachenski, I'll make a motion. We approve with the amendments I've laid out and a number of 400 scooters not to exceed.
All right, you got that, Mr. Gosted? Got the motion. All right, we've got a motion. Do we have a second? Second. Got a second from Mr. Kavami. All right, for open to further discussion. Mr. Sani, President Sani.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Do we need to designate additional areas, or are we just going to we're not going to go with the map that we had originally discussed? Or is that something we're going to look at? 1804, I believe it is. No. We're just going to...
I know we talked about possibly getting a few, members together to initially set that. What would be, does that have some ability to be adjusted as needed?
It does, and that map is the designated downtown area, and that's where scooters can't be used on sidewalks.
Right.
Was the purpose of that. And electric scooters can only be on roads that are less than 30 miles an hour and on any sidewalks except for in this downtown area.
Okay, and so otherwise scooters are allowed? That's
correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any further comment? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. Sorry, All right, that was the only public hearing and second reading of ordinance. We'll move on to action items. I know 4.1 with the budget needs to be pulled. And any further items that council members wish to have pulled for action items tonight? Yeah, Mr. Veen.
Hey, Mayor, can you pull 4, 9, 10, and 11?
9, 10, and 11. Absolutely. Any other items council members wish pulled for this evening? He said 4.9, 4.10, and 4.11. Anything further? All right, so we would look for a motion to approve items 4.2, 4.3, 4.4, 4.5, 4.6, 4.7, 4.8, and 4.12. For a motion to approve that? Got a motion from President Sandy, second from Mr. Veen. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. We'd be on to item 4.1, Ms. Storstad.
Yes, thank you. 4.1 is the introduction of ordinance and preliminary approval of the mayor's 2023 budget. I'll do my best to sum this up and give you a direction on what action would be looking for tonight. The mayor and his staff worked administratively to compile this budget. We did have salary discussion and a budget preview that was presented on June 20th. We presented the budget on July 18th for City Council's review and approval. As presented, the budget does focus on people, public safety, infrastructure, and technology. What we're looking for tonight is preliminary approval and introduction of the ordinance. Please know as you look at this, once you have preliminary approval, you can make budget changes to decrease the budget, but after the preliminary approval and before final approval, you cannot increase the budget as you consider any changes. But just to sum up some of the highlights, and these are included in your staff report, and you have your budget binders as well that were distributed. This budget holds the mills level. The utility rates overall for an estimated single-family 6,000 gallon user a month would pay an increase of about 2.74% or $2.67 per month. The overall budget, $226.6 million compared to $216 million previous year. If you were to net this out for internal transfers, as we discussed at the presentation, it would be $197.5 million versus $193.2 or a 2.28% increase overall. Your general fund is 20% of the total, or $45.8 million. 76% of your general fund is public safety, health, streets, and engineering, with 53% of the general fund public safety. Public safety portion makes up $24.3 million of the general fund budget. It does focus on public safety. We are including getting back to fully funding capital reserve for fire and police. We do have 6 additional police officers included in this budget with phased-in funding through a COPS grant. We're equivalent of 1.5 positions city funded for 2023, and that's phased in over a 4-year period. We do also have the 2 additional PSAP dispatchers positions included in here. Other highlights are summed up in the staff report. We do also, as noted, the Alara Center has a large roof project in the 2023 budget. We ask that as we speak with the commission and staff to allow us to strategize the most cost-efficient approach as far as timing of that project. Also included is a City Hall remodel for this space up here in Council Chambers, where we look to internally finance that. We would use cash from our loan and stabilization and pay ourselves back from the Public Building Fund. As an update to the budget presentation and requested information, there was a request for information regarding the pay for performance portion of the salary plan. I am going to turn it over to Tangi, and she's going to give you an update on what staff has been looking at there.
Thank you, Maureen. You all received the staff report, and I assume you had a chance to read it, so I won't read it to you. Just to summarize, that we are consistently looking at our compensation system and salary plan to ensure that we remain competitive. On July 18th, Vice President Council Member Weber had requested that we looked into how we could more fully fund the salary plan, as the performance dollars were short this year. And so as administration, Maureen, Todd, myself, Budget Officer Mike Rottensdahl, took a look at the budget and our salary plan and ran several scenarios, from one-time cash infusions to employees to improving the salary plan by adding a steady, stable funding mechanism for performance dollars to the salary plan. And that's what you'll see before you today, is the option for your discussion to add 1% performance funding dollars to the salary plan.
I'm not sure if you mentioned it, Maureen, but this will be funded in 2023 through the Loan and Stabilization Fund, and then forward, it would be built into the budget. The impact of adding that 1% to the wages would be the performance dollars would go from $35,000 up to $265,000 for general fund, and comparable $52,000 to $386,000 for across all funds. And what that means in terms of actual dollars per employee is, when we talked about performance funding at the last presentation, it ended up being an average of 5 cents per hour per employee. And with this 1%, it will bump that up to an average of 35 cents per hour per employee. So that's the cost impact of adding that 1%. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have about the staff report. Otherwise, if you would like to discuss that option.
So is that option currently in there, or is it something that would need to be added right now? Where are we at as far as?
Mayor Boczynski, members of the City Council, the numbers that I went through do not include that, so if that is something that you would like included with the preliminary approval of the budget tonight, that would just make that known in your motion tonight.
All right, this time open up to any questions for Ms. Pavette first, and then, no, stay available, yeah.
Mr. Pavette, when did you start working on the salary plan?
We started working on the salary plan in January.
In January. Thanks, you did a good job. It was hard work. Thanks.
All right, Mr. Weigel, please.
Ms. Pavette, we're still waiting on prices for insurance, correct?
That is correct.
So hypothetically, we could fund this extra 1% for our city employees out of the budget and loan stabilization fund. Insurance comes back at 3% lower than we expected. We can backfill that budget and loan stabilization fund, correct?
Absolutely. You would have the option to backfill that loan and stabilization fund, or even add those dollars to, that would be the decision at that time for the council.
Do you have something else, Ms. Dorset? Okay. All right. When's I gotta say, one second, I just said, when is the final approval? So is that in 2 weeks, or do we have that in 4 weeks?
So the final approval of the budget and public hearing is set, or that's part of what we will ask for you to take action on tonight, is to set the public hearing for September 19th. That's a Monday night at 5:30 at a council meeting. In the meantime, what happens is, with what action is taken tonight for approval, we will communicate that to the Grand Forks County Auditor. They will set out notifications to every household on behalf of all taxing entities, and it will include the time, date, location of the public hearing, as well as an estimated tax statement. And that goes to every household, and they have to send that out by August 31st. So that gives you till September 19th to come back for final approval.
Okay, so in final approval, there can be any further cuts that are decided by then, so they're 6 weeks roughly. Okay. President Sandy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Bovette, I know you weren't the director of the HR department when we implemented our current salary plan policy. Do you recall, do you remember when we implemented the current policy?
The current salary plan, the compensation system that the city uses, was implemented in 2002.
In 2002. So in the words of one of my great mentors, Doug Christensen, when he and Hal Gershman were elected to the council, they were laser focused on fixing the salary problems and the retention problems that they had with the employees in the city of Grand Forks. The collective bargaining, the difficulty with the department heads, the turnover that we had, all led them to spend a lot of time thinking and working with staff, working with the mayor and the administration back then, trying to come up with a plan, a process that people thought was fair and that would help eliminate the turnover problems that we've been having at the city. So, and I know we've had a few issues with our police department lately, but in general, are we having, I know we can't fill civil engineering positions in the engineering department. Are we having a lot of turnover?
Yes, the answer to that question, President Sandy, is yes, we are having a lot of turnover issues, as well as recruitment issues, as are many employers. And so it's very important that our compensation system stays competitive, and if we can boost it to give it a more competitive edge, that would be excellent for the city.
So just to confirm though, we are fully funding our salary plan. Under the current scenario, we're not shorting the salary plan. We are fully funding it 100% according to our current policy.
Correct. That is correct.
Right. And so right now, what we're discussing, based upon documentation that we got 2 days ago, we're talking about changing the process, the policy for how we pay people for the entire city in an 8-minute conversation at a council meeting related to the budget that will last us for years and years and years to come. I'm certainly all for paying our employees and making sure that we stay competitive. I think we should. And if we have a problem with our salary plan, we should fix that problem. I don't feel comfortable ad hoc saying, well, let's just throw in 1% at the pay for performance. We haven't even thought about what that means. What happens 2 years, because we know it happens. We have years where the market goes crazy and we have to put all our money towards market adjustments. Then we have years when everyone stays the same, and then so all of our raises go to pay for performance. What happens 2 years from now when the market adjustment is 0 and the pay for performance has 700,000 in it, and we're throwing an extra 1% at it just because? I'm totally all there with paying our employees. I think we should actually spend some time and talk about it. I mean, over time, we've changed. We've changed how we pay our council members. We've changed how we pay the mayor. We've changed how our department heads. And we heard earlier this year, in June, I believe, when we first started talking about the salary plan, that we're comparing ranges for our department heads, but aren't actually looking at what the department heads in the other cities are actually getting paid. I think that's a flaw in our salary plan. I think we should talk about it, we should think about it, we should vote and perhaps change it. But I don't think we should do that at this meeting and for this budget. We are fully funding, and this is just my opinion, and if all of you disagree with me, I'm 100% okay, and I'll move right on. I think we should, as good governance and good policy, we should spend more time thinking about it than just tonight going into the final budget. But I'm not going to throw myself on my sword because I think our employees are probably worth it anyway, and so if everyone disagrees with me, I'm 100% okay with that. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, President Sandy. Mr. Veen, please.
Yeah, a question for Mr. Sandy. If we did that now and then took the time between now and final approval, would that work with you?
Yeah, I think
that amount of time? I mean, because we can't increase it.
That's correct. So if we do move to increase, put the 1% in now, we can always take it out at final. And if there's time to actually put the thought in, I'm 100% okay with it. Again, we've changed the plan. We've eliminated lots of cities. We used to compare ourselves to Crookston. We compared ourselves to Mayville, which in my opinion actually made sense because they're the people we're potentially losing our employees to. But in terms of fairness of how much people get paid in Mayville versus Grand Forks, it's probably not fair, which is why I went along with it. Although it artificially inflates the salaries for our employees. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe we are losing them to Duluth and Rochester and Bismarck. It's certainly possible. I'm smart enough to know that I don't know the answer to that, but I'm certainly willing to have the conversation. Thank you, Mr. Mead.
Mayor Paczynski.
Yep, please.
President Sandy, I look at it a little bit different. I look at if our insurance comes in lower anyways, I think we voted last week to include that money within the pay for performance dollars to begin with. To me, I look at this as more of maybe a gamble, right? We're banking that 7% is going to be less than maybe 2 or 3% for insurance. And really, we're just front loading that money tonight, banking on insurance being less. To me, I don't think it's a change of policy. And going forward, I think it's a one-time adjustment that we're seeing record inflation at 9%, and we're doing the best we can for our employees in the tough times. So to me, it's just front-loading that, gambling that the health insurance is going to be a little bit lower.
Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Yep, please.
Mayor, can you turn the comments back off on Facebook if there's a live stream, please?
Please, Mr. President Sandy.
I think Mr. Phelan, I've questioned Mr. Phelan about the salary policy for 12 years now. And Mr. Phelan, I'll let you answer the question. What do you say every time I tell you I think we should tinker here or tinker there or do something else? What do you always say?
Mayor Bochensky and Council President Sandy, I always say to follow a plan, but always be willing to adapt. And so I think we are under extraordinary inflationary conditions that probably haven't been seen for the last 40 years from what I've been told. We did take a look at, overall we budgeted 4.13% per capita, we'll say. And so with this 1%, we're at like 5.13%. Looking at what inflation is just for compensation, I took a look, it's about 6%. And so we'd still be under that 6% inflationary condition. What we thought is, it's not, I think we are following the plan. We are following the plan. And what this 1% really does is, there were concerns that we heard, and again, Mr. Weber championed it. So we want to at least give you an option so we weren't fumbling through on a night like this, is that, that 5 cents, is that something we can up a little bit so that somebody who's a high performer, it's a morale issue, so that's where the 1% came in. People are going to get a little bit of an ad on that. We still are following the salary plan. I think we are chasing inflation a little bit too, so we didn't want to go way out on 9% or something like that. So I thought this was a prudent way to at least give you an option. I know it would be a big deal for the employees to know that this city council did add in money, followed the plan, but added more in for the performance element.
Right, and I'm 100%, and again, I'd love paying people. I think it's great. I think everyone should be paid what they're worth and more. I might not be here in 8 years. You might not be here. And so we don't know what the people at this table are going to say when there is no market adjustment and there's $1 million for pay for performance. We don't know, because all it takes is one person to say, hey, we got a bunch of potholes, or we need this road done. And so pay for performance, we paid out extra a few years ago. Let's just dip right now and we'll take a little bit away and it's no big deal. I think that's why we follow the policy. That's why. Thank you. Thank you, Todd.
Thank you, President Sandy. Ms. Bovett, as far as setting up or looking at a different salary plan, what policy on that? What kind of time goes into that? What would it take? I mean, is there some comparative cities that do this really well, that have steps built in and earlier? And I mean, is there a comparison that we could do quickly rather than, something that's going to take a number of months?
Right, so, and actually, since our salary plan is 20-plus years old, we have been looking for a consultant to design a new compensation system for us. We have been in contact with several of those consultants. Unfortunately, they are very scarce and limited in resources right now due to staffing issues, and then the fact that everybody else is in the same boat we are and wanting compensation studies, compensation systems revamped in an effort to attract and retain employees. So we are in touch with a couple of them and hope to make some progress later this year, but it's been difficult just to get on their schedules.
All right. Mr. Kamami, please.
In the short term, while we wait to revamp or not revamp, I mean, could it be as simple as an inflationary trigger that allows us the opportunity to have this conversation so that we're still following the plan, but if there's a year-over-year triggering point, which is something that we can talk about before we do final approval of the budget, is that something that you've seen before?
So certainly we could just look at it for 2023 and then revisit again next year for 2024. We just had written in the staff report that it would be an ongoing change to the salary plan, as it had actually been a point of discussion for several years to make that performance funding a more stable pot of money. So it's something that we propose to you as a year after year, but you certainly could do a one-time adjustment, and then we could revisit it next year for 2024, if that was the direction the council wanted to go.
All right. Guess we'll leave it to council for now for further comments as far as what you want to do tonight. Mr. Weigel.
Mayor, I'd make a motion to approve of your budget to include the 1% for 2023. Any money that is saved from insurance would replenish the budget and loan stabilization fund for this year. Then I would ask that we visit this through the quiet winter months and come up with a plan with HR.
All right, thank you. Mr. Weigel has a motion. Do we have a second on that motion?
Could I?
Oh, wait 1 second. I think Ms. Storsell wanted clarification.
Could you also just add the public hearing to that motion, as well as the flexibility on the timing of that Alaris roof project? Those are two other pieces. Unless you want separate motions, that's fine too.
No, I would include those as well.
All right, we've got a motion on the floor. Do we have a second? We got a second. The motion is from Mr. Weigel, second from Mr. Kavami. Open up to further comment. Mr. Veen, yeah, please.
A better explanation of the motion, it's to study it this winter, this coming winter, not between now and the next council meeting?
You were just, I mean, that wasn't intended to be part of the motion, you just meant that as
Correct.
a work plan going forward? Okay.
Yep.
So he was gonna, yeah, oh, please.
I'd even go as far to say that maybe it's something that the Pension and Insurance Committee looks at. It's dealing a little bit with the pension insurance already and how we're funding that. Maybe it's something that that committee also dives into as far as salary plan and meeting with HR.
All right, any further comments? All right, seeing none, we'll take it to a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously.
Okay. 4.9, traffic study report for project 8477, Fufang traffic study.
All right. Mr. Veen, did you have some clarifications for item 4.9?
4.9, I just want to make a couple comments. I know there was some trouble getting the traffic report out for us to view. They did that. We got it late today, and there was some computer glitches. I understand that. I was able to meet or have a discussion with Mike Bittner one-on-one to talk about the study. I did ask some things about some of the traffic congestion, I-29, Highway 2, which I wanted. All of my questions, at least so far, were answered. I just wanted to let you know. And the MOU, which it referred to, will be coming out later, right? I mean, because that originally, the way it was written, it looked like it was approved now, but that comes out later. Is that true?
That's correct.
Okay. With that, I'm ready to vote.
Okay. Any further comments on item 4.9? That's just a receive and file. Is that what we're looking for on that one, essentially? Okay. All right. Seeing no further comments, do we get a motion? We got a motion for approval to receive and file from President Sandy. Do we have a second? Second from Mr. Veen. All right. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously.
4.10, Fufang Highway 81 Task Orders Special Assessment Districts.
All right, open that up for any comments. Yeah, Mr. Veen, please.
I think I explained my no vote last time at the Committee of the Whole, so I'm just ready to vote.
Okay. Got a motion to approve item 4.10. Do we have a second? Got a motion and a second. Any further comment on item 4.10, which includes A, B, C, and D? All right, seeing no further comment, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. I believe that motion carried. So did you vote against, Mr. Veen? Can we do a roll call?
No, so yeah, I voted against it.
Okay. Two? Okay. And Ms. Blonsky did not vote, so I believe it was a 3 to 2. Motion carries. Item 4.11.
4.11, raw water booster station and intake improvements, project 8553.
All right. Again, Mr. Veen, did you have some clarifications? Do we have our waterworks? Yeah, we have some people here as well.
I had, and probably if I could start out with, for Mr. Phelan, can you give us all a high-level overview of how the project works? I mean, obviously right now, if the project goes through, Fufang needs raw water. And we currently have two 30-inch raw water lines that go out to the plant, and then we'll have two at 18-inch that go to the property. We will own and operate. Could you have just a high-level overview?
Yeah. Mayor Bojanski and Councilmember Veen, I certainly will. The project is to add 2 additional pumps at our current raw water intake. And so that'll move the capacity roughly from 24 MGD to 32 MGD to provide that raw water that, right now it's 6.6, but it would give us, I think, a capacity up to 8. As part of the raw water intake, that'd be the major thing that would be specific to the Fufang project. There'd be other improvements that we're looking at making at the raw water intake, some things that need to be renewed. That would be an overall benefit for not only Fufang, but the entire community. So there'll be likely some adds on the intake. There are 2 transmission lines that you discussed, Council Member Veen. What we're looking at as part of the raw water intake is how we can manifold that, so that right now Fufang needs to use the Red River permit. And one of the things we've discussed is, and Mr. Beering was here previous, in normal times, and we use primarily Red Lake River throughout our city for potable water. We'll say at plus or minus on a 90-10 basis, 90% Red Lake and then 10% Red River. If we are suddenly to enter in with Fufang and there's 6 or 7 MGD from the Red River, that would change our mix currently at our water treatment plant. So there was some discussion, can we gain some control at the raw water intake so that we can have a better segregation at the raw water intake? So we are going to, as part of this study and this task order, we are going to take a look at if that makes sense for us to do. And so we'll be doing some further investigation as part of that task order to do that. This task order is also going to look at that pump station. The pump station would be primarily for the Fufang wet corn mill, and that would be to pump that raw water to the site. This task order does not deal with those 2 dual lines that carry the water from the pump station to the Fufang site. So this would just be specifically on the raw water intake side, and also that Fufang dedicated pump station. That's what you're approving with that. Later we'll come back with a task order that would incorporate those 2 dual lines as we move forward. But right now we're just looking at those 2 of the 3 component parts, if you will.
Yeah, and I think you kind of touched on exactly what we know, that we primarily use Red Lake River for the plant, and they're going to use raw water out of the river. You've only got the 2 pipes. Will we have one servicing the raw water out of the Red Lake and the other one out of the Red River?
I think that's one of the things that the task order will look at, how best to operate and design this. And obviously that design would come back to you as a city council. It'd come back also to the North Dakota State Water Commission, because we're going to ask for 60% funding for not only the design here, but also for the construction. So they'll have to sign off on the design and how we're planning it. So I think that's a yet to be determined, and the engineers are taking a look at that and how best to do it. And we'd certainly want input from the city council and from you, Mr. Veen, because that is something I do ponder. Is currently right now the mix is largely Red Lake. We did use a lot more Red River in 21 when we had some of the water supply challenges that we had. The council should know our water treatment was built in a very robust way, so that whatever the surface water that was coming, or whatever the quality, that we'd be able to treat that water source. If we move more towards the Red River as part of our treatment process, it's going to cause us to use more chemicals, and so those are some of the challenges we have. If we're just shipping raw water to that pump station in the Fufang, we're not treating that water, therefore we don't have all those treatment issues. So we're really weighing all the cost and benefits of those. some of that risk analysis that we talk a lot about, and then coming back with you with a recommendation prior to bidding of how we would like to move forward.
Yeah, because I think one of the concerns would be the factor of safety. When we decided to locate that plant at that location, it was really critical. We have 2 pipes, so we'd have a factor, a fallback. If something happens to one, we would have another one. Obviously, we will still have that, but you would have different water sources depending on how that would come together. So that's part of me is trying to understand the operations of that. I actually had a concerned citizens who probably knew the difference out there and asked me to help explain that, which I really couldn't. So I really wanted to ask about that. And then the other item was, we're going to take our infrastructure, obviously. We will be creating a raw water utility, basically. We don't have one at this time. We're creating a whole new utility to serve raw water. All of our other industry uses potable water, which is a part of our existing water system, but raw water is brand new utility for us, so we'll have to I would assume, put that together. One of the concerns that I also wanted to make sure is addressed is we have a lot of sunk costs in the infrastructure that we have, and there needs to be some ability to recover those costs as we go forward, and then future costs, including depreciation and all of that, has to somehow get figured into this too. Is that right? Does that make sense?
Mayor Buchansky and Councilmember, you are correct. We do have a cost of service model, and based upon that cost, whether it's existing assets or new that we're going to build, we have to define what that cost of service is, and then obviously turn that into a rate-making strategy as part of us moving forward. So we certainly will do that and evaluate all the best options, so as you described, and that's hopefully, if you do approve this, that's what we'll take a look at as part of this task order.
And maybe the last piece is the issue of, and we've had this discussion, not gotten into it deeply, but the issue of having their own raw water intake versus, which would be a couple of miles of some, or whatever it looks like, versus the 9.5 miles of line to get there now. Is that something, even if we did it, that can't be done, is to have a separate raw water so we maintain the redundancy that we have with the system, the integrity of the current raw water system to the plant?
Mayor Buchansky and Councilmember Bean, it's something that we did not look deeply into when we looked at serving this. It's not to say as part of this option we can't look at it for the maybe a longer term. Obviously, using our intake on the Red River provides the quickest way for us to move forward. But you know what? We hope the city of Grand Forks is around here a long time, and so it's probably something that we could take a further look at in the future. I think when their industry is using and including Fufang is using our permits, so we do have some control at least. And so that we're certainly going to have a utility agreement, and if there are water supply concerns, if it's our permit, we do have some control. If it's somebody else's intake, I think that was one of the benefits. Obviously, if they had their own intake, it would be all on them. However, at the same time, with it being as part of ours, at least we have some control in moments of truth where we can have some further control of that. So it's a weighing both, but it's something that we're certainly are looking at. I would say on the raw water, I didn't answer your question on the raw water. I always saw it as part of the Waterworks Enterprise Fund, which is a fund 5,300. I always saw this raw water supply being a revenue as part of the Waterworks Fund 5,300. In a similar vein, when we were working with Northern Plains Nitrogen, they were going to use wastewater reuse. I thought that wastewater reuse would be a revenue line item in the wastewater fund, which would be 5,200. But again, they would be two different ways that we'd serve, but it would all go back to one of those two funds in that case. So it just shows that we're really going to have, as we look over time, we're going to have a lot of diversified revenue streams.
Okay, one last thing. So the items that we've talked about, that would be included, you think, in the study as we go forth as a part of this? Because I have made it hopefully clear, I'm not interested in construction, I'm interested in knowing the information, the facts, the risks and stuff. That will be addressed in this?
Yes. What I hear you, Mr. Vini, is that you're concerned about the redundancy with the dual transmission lines that are already built, primarily down the Demers Avenue corridor. You're concerned about what work is going to go on in the raw water intake, providing raw water, and is there an alternative strategy, if not short-term, longer-term, to take a look at it? Number three, that you want to make sure that when we look at the cost of service, that we're looking at all the existing and built infrastructure, that that's being accounted for as part of the rate-making strategy. And all of that, all those things I just talked about are ultimately going to have to get into the utility agreement too with them.
And if you don't mind, add the risk assessment for those so we can do that comparison. And I have a form that I would gladly share that I use regularly in the work that I do now that I think would help with that.
Yep. And Mayor Wojcinski, one of the reasons, and Ken had a really great idea of getting the Red River Valley Water Supply water, because I knew the raw water supply task order was going to come up, so I just wanted to give everyone a sense of kind of where we're at with raw water supply. That's going to have to be taken a look at the same parallel as we design that, looking at our raw water supply and what we may or may not have to do as part of it.
And I do have some statistics from back in 2012 on the Red Lake River that I'd love to share with you.
Yeah.
All right, any further comments on item 4.11? All right, we got a motion to approve from President Sandy. Do we have a second? We got a second from Ms. Lunsky. Any further comments on item 4.11? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. I believe that was 5-1 with Osowski dissenting. Motion carries. That is all for information, or all for action items. We got 5 information items. There are none. So we'll move on to citizen comments section.
Okay, I've got a number here. There's one that was a different type of topic, so we'll just call him Jason Patrick.
Mr. Patrick, please.
Hope everybody's having a good evening. Mr. Vane, the applause wasn't necessarily about you potentially taking sides. It's about doing the right thing. When you go into any situation, granted my experience is a bit different, but for me, you go into something.
Can you get close to the mic, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me okay now? We good? Okay, so Verizon commercial in full effect. All right, good deal. So anyways, as I was saying, Mr. Bain, people applauding wasn't necessarily about you taking sides or anything like that. It's about the fact that you're doing the right things, and you're taking the right tact and taking the right approach. You always prepare for the absolute worst. I didn't carry 210 rounds of 5.56 into combat because I thought it was going to be an okay day. I did it because I wanted to be able to take care of myself. I didn't carry an IFAC because I thought it was going to be an okay day. That's a first aid kit. Worst case scenario. And that's how people need to think. So that's what that's about. It was posted earlier today, became aware of, privy to some email traffic with Ms. Carlson regarding the sending of the officers to her home. Doing some digging through city code. And I'm not saying that this is the case, and I hope that it is not the case, one of the two, that there isn't an overstepping of bounds on the part of the city attorney, and that if somebody asked him to do so, that they would at least have the integrity to say so, to go to the chief of police and have him go out to Ms. Carlson's house and question her. It's covered under, let's see, city attorney duties are covered under Article 4, 3-04-01. There's nothing in there that states anything about interacting with chief of police. And if you go to Article 3, 5-0302, Chief of Police, subject to the orders of the mayor and the city council, should be the chief executive of the office police department, shall be responsible for its discipline, efficiency, etc. City attorney is not a council member. They're an appointed officer. There's some fun verbiage in there where you can maybe get a little cloudy. Maybe. And then I really hope that it is just maybe a case of a personal request, because it goes back to integrity and council, and I've sat up here and said this a lot about integrity, all right, and principles, all right, and I know you guys are looking at me like, great, here he goes again, but if it wasn't an issue, I wouldn't be here talking about it. And maybe it's a bit overdeveloped, but when it comes to leadership, I have very high expectations, very high. And my final point, do you feel that silencing the comments on the live feed is the morally and ethically correct thing to do when you have over 100 viewers trying to watch and voice their opinions, and you are silencing them? You have people complaining about CCP type tactics and things that they do. That's the kind of stuff they do, and it creeps in slow.
Yes.
All right.
Turns out you have a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Patrick. Thank you.
Okay.
Are you confused on that?
I just got one other comment that's separate, or a subject that's separate from most other comments. So, Mr. Kadlec?
Mr. Cadillac, please.
Hi. Yeah, you guys are discussing your salaries now, and I've always been taught and understood that you have to do your job in order to earn your salaries. And I would suggest that you guys take a step back and look at what you've actually done to earn a salary here. You know? You people are jeopardizing people's jobs and their livelihoods, and then you're looking for raises? Mr. Sandy is starting to sound more like Mr. Weber every day. I mean, every time he starts talking, there's giggling going on because he's not making a lot of sense. And of course, nothing been going on here the last 4 or 5 months has made any sense. The whole world is talking about it. South America tells us we're in a war. Bullets aren't being fired, but we're in a war. And then you worry about other people making threats? You people have threatened the safety and security of this entire nation. People are scared. People are worried about what's happening. People write into us and say, you are defending the United States. Stand in there. There is more help coming. But you people need to really take an exit soon, because the sooner you do, the more money you're going to save for the city and its taxpayers, and the more problems you're going to save for yourself, because there are going to be legal litigations with a lot of things that have been done, because it was announced, and I'm sure most of you have seen the clip, that you guys have overstepped your bounds, you guys have not been honest, and you know what's the truth and what isn't the truth, and others do too. And you are going to have to face up to what you have done, sooner or later. And I'm not talking about me or about these people here. I'm talking about the citizens of this great nation. We love our freedom. You people don't understand what the word means. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cadillac.
Okay, these are just in the order they were put in the basket. So, Jeff Kenner?
Hello, everybody. My name is Jeff Kenner. I'm from Devils Lake, North Dakota. I do a lot of business in Grand Forks. In fact, this is my 3rd trip today I care about your community just like I care about my community. I'm here today as a voice of reason. I ask each and every one of you to open up your hearts and minds to what I'm about to say. I'm late in the game joining this fight, but really this should not be a fight. I'm here because I care about all of the people who are going to be negatively affected by your decision to allow Fufang into our region. I don't believe you know all the extremely important facts regarding Fufang, and it seems like you have chosen to ignore a lot of the public who have concerns. Now, please slow down, let everyone be heard, get all the facts. And I'd like to thank Senators Marco Rubio, Kevin Kramer, and John Hoeven for requesting the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States to conduct a review of the Fufang Group. Once you know all of the facts, put it to a vote of the community. The reason I want the community to be able to vote is you were elected into these positions by everyone in this region, not just a select few. Everybody had a say electing you into these positions, and everybody should have a say whether Fufang is allowed to be here or not. Abraham Lincoln once said, "I feel sorry for the man who can't feel the whip when it is laid on the other man's back." I'm going to repeat that. He said, "I feel sorry for the man who can't feel the whip when it is laid on the other man's back." To me, it feels like Lincoln's statement when thousands of people are being suppressed and their voices are not being heard. If you were in their shoes, wouldn't you want to be heard? Wouldn't you want a voice? My prayer today is that God is a God of justice, and if Fufang is not an honorable company and they affect people negatively and are a threat to our nation's security, God will open up your eyes and not allow this to happen. For the love of your fellow man and community, I pray you will make the right decision. God bless each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kenner.
Beth Waldeck?
Good evening, Mayor Buczynski and President Dana Sandy and the rest of the council members. My name is Beth Waldeck, and I'm a Grand Forks resident for the past 18 years and also a disabled veteran of the United States Air Force. Just over a week ago, North Dakota Senator Kevin Kramer publicly stated that if the city proceeds with the plans to build the Fufang plant here, that it's likely that the Air Force Base would pull their missions from the base because the risk of espionage is just too great. Now, while it's true that, we know Senator Kramer isn't going to be the one to ultimately make that decision, it's certain that he would be consulted as a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Now, you continually have stated publicly that the Air Force has not come out against this project, but that's just not the case. Because United States Air Force Chief of Staff General Charles Brown Jr. brought it to the attention of the Senate Intelligence Committee earlier this year and stated that he had grave concerns about this project. However, he couldn't even talk about it in front of an open Congress because it was classified information. Local base officials are not allowed to make any public statements on any project, anything going along, whether it's who you're voting for or a project in town or anything else, as a matter of military law. So to say that local base officials haven't come out against this, it just isn't true. They can't come out for or against it by matter of military law.
Stop lying.
So I wanted to share some numbers with you that I just dug up on the internet last week for fiscal year 2019. The economic impact of the Grand Forks Air Force Base in our community was significant, to say the least. Military payroll, over $95 million. Civilian payroll, over $41 million. Job creation, an average of 885 jobs with an annual salary of over $48,000 for almost $43 million in fiscal year 2019. Some expenditures that were local, O&M construction, $21 million. Service contracts, almost $18 million. The base exchange, $5.5 million. Health and TRICARE expenditures in our area, almost $12 million. Utilities, over $10 million. Supplies and equipment, over $21 million. Total expenditures, over $91 million for a total economic impact of almost $271 million in 1 year.
Wow.
It's only getting bigger because we're supposed to be getting another mission. We're going to be getting more people. That's going to make the economic impact even greater on this community. Now, in contrast, here's some numbers that we've gotten from you. The council wants to give the CCP a $100 million infrastructure upgrade at our expense. $156 million in tax breaks for Fufang over the next 20 years is another perk of doing business with the council. All of this and more for the promise, quote unquote, of some upwards of 1,000 temporary construction jobs and up to 235 factory jobs. There's no way that this council or Fufang can guarantee any of those jobs will actually be filled by people in Grand Forks, or that people will come from outside of Grand Forks to fulfill those actual jobs. Everybody knows you can't spit in this town without hitting a help wanted sign. We have so many jobs available in this town already that are not being filled. You discussed it tonight amongst your own city employees. We have a retention and a recruitment problem for city employees. Now, while it can certainly be said that right now the Air Force has made no decision as to the continued missions of the base to date, it's certainly plausible and it has to be considered. $271 million of annual economic impact means that we have to consider it. Is it worth even the slightest risk of losing that economic impact because those missions go away? Is this council ready to stand before the citizens of Grand Forks, the people of North Dakota, and yes, the United States, and state that you are willing to choose Communist China over the United States of America? Are you ready to tell the United States Air Force that they can pack up and go because the CCP is coming to town? Is it really what you're willing to risk in the name of some possible economic development? We elected you as our city leaders, and we should be able to count on, beyond a doubt, that you will act with integrity. So with your integrity in mind, I'm going to ask you to do the following. If you are ready, right now, to support the United States Constitution and to side with the United States of America and shut down this project, please stand now. If you choose to remain seated, we the people will take that as a public statement that you are choosing to side with Communist China over the United States of America. So you're going to sit for China, or are you going to stand for America? It's time for you to make a decision. What's your choice?
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wallach.
Thank you, Val, for what I'm talking to.
You guys should be ashamed of yourself.
Mr. Coachman, please.
You look at that. That's what I thought.
All right, let me just get through it.
Hello, City Council. I'm there. I'm going to play this.
Keep smiling.
No, that we aren't skirting our duties of answering questions. Questions are asked and answered dozens of times Ms. Carlson has personally sent the mayor over 100 emails, and he continues to respond to them. Mr. Coachman sends emails constantly, and he constantly gets answers to his questions. He wants to put on a spectacle. Don't let him fool you. The only reason he wants to be on the agenda is to make a spectacle of things. That's not what we're up to. I'll continue to answer his email. If he wants to call me, I'll talk to him. Happy to do that. I'll even put those answers in writing in my email like I do all the time, and they're public records. It's not a big deal. Don't be fooled when
So, Mr. Sanders, how many emails have I sent to you?
None since that night, zero.
What night?
A single phone call.
What night?
That was 2 weeks ago.
No, that was just a videotape. I haven't talked to you or emailed you
That's not true.
since March 1st.
Fine.
Okay? So, you're saying I sent a lot of them. I haven't. I haven't sent just maybe 3 to you. At the most, 3. Okay? But that's not what you made out. Matter of fact, Mr. Veen, I sent you email. Did you respond to it?
Not that I recall.
That's right. Mr. Cameron, have you responded to my email? No. Mr. Ryder? No. Mr. Gosted, I sent you a whole bunch of emails you never respond to. Mr. Mayor, I sent it to you, but you even got a copy of it. Said, refer to the city council, or it's to the attorney. So when you're talking about me making a spectacle of myself, I already mentioned about 3 city council ago that one of the things that you could do is take the questions, put it on a PowerPoint presentation and bring to the people. That's all I want to do. Because you have not answered all the people. Have Mr. Kelly, have all your questions been answered?
None of them.
Spicers, have yours. Matter of fact, anybody whose questions have not been answered, would you stand up? Obviously, all the questions have not been answered. All I want to do is bring a presentation, good, bad, and ugly, to let everybody be on the same page. Because the questions are not being answered. So my question is, will I have an opportunity to bring the questions? Matter of fact, as I was thinking about this, I don't have a problem making a PowerPoint presentation with all the questions and giving it to you 3 to 5 days before a city council meeting and look at it. It'd be the final draft. And you can look at the questions before you present them. If you want to do a 2-part series, 3-part series, depending on how many questions there are, it's up to you. I presented it to you first to take all the questions. But you, Mr. Sanders, said, I want to do it to grandstand. No. I'm trying to get questions answered. You don't want to. We already saw a lot of questions. And I'm asking you again, may I be put on an agenda to present the questions that we all are on the same page? I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this for all of us as a city. We have to have the questions answered until we go forward. But no one on the city council wants to. You more likely rather sit down and not do anything. And I'm trying to be proactive. I'm trying to work with you. I'm trying to work with we the people with the city council. Because you know why? That's what leaders do. I want to work with you. I want to work with the people so we can all go in one direction. How can 2 walk together lest there be an agreement? And I'm trying to get an agreement with each and every one here. I'm trying to get the questions, because we all have questions. If we get the questions answered, we can go forward to either keep going or stop. But let's work together to get the questions answered. So I'm asking the city council, may I please be put on the agenda to do a PowerPoint presentation with all the questions, and that PowerPoint be given to you 3 to 5 days before city council. Mr. Sanders?
Anything else, Mr. Coachman, this evening?
Well, I'd like to hear from Mr. Sanders unless he wants to talk about me, unless I go in the hallway. I want to know right now. Because it's easier to talk about, or say something about me when I'm not in the room. I'm in the room. You need an answer.
I'll address you very directly. Mr. Coachman, you obviously heard what I said. You've had 2 weeks to send me, call me, send me an email, send me any questions you want.
Mr.
Instead of doing that, no, I'm sorry. Mr. Coachman, I can answer too. This is super easy.
Mr. Coachman, let him finish. Mr. Coachman, let him
We
finish.
already had an overview of how many people questions were given, and not one of you gave back the question.
You did not take the time, you took the time to record that, you didn't take the time to pick up the phone.
No, that came up, that was off of this.
I'm not apologizing.
You know, I know, you never do.
Mr. Coachman, anything further, please?
You have my phone number, you have my email.
You know what, Mr. Sanders, you have not even answered my first group of questions. Why are you going to answer this one?
All right, Mr. Coachman, please, anything?
And that whole city council, except for the 2 young ladies who were just appointed, but the previous people never answered either. So if you guys have not answered the question that I first said, why am I going to waste my megabytes or bits just to email something that you're not going to do? You're not even answering the people. So don't sit there and tell me, Mr. Sanders, that you're going to answer my questions when you haven't even answered the people.
Okay. Mr. Coachman, thank you.
Thank you.
Move on to the next speaker, please.
Would you like me to go in the hallway so you can talk about me?
Sean Beauclair.
Mr. Beauclair, please. Yeah, Mr. Beauclair, please.
Why can't you answer the questions?
Because they can't stand up either.
Yeah, they can't answer questions.
Excuse me, ma'am. Mr. Beauclair, it's your turn.
Council, Mr. Mayor, thank you for having me once again. Have a request. I'd like to cover 3 things tonight. I would ask that I could be allowed 5 to 6 minutes, simply because I travel long distance. If you grant me that, I won't come 2 weeks from now. Would that be acceptable to everybody?
Please get it as close to, as tight as you can. If you'd love, you can set up a meeting anytime for further, longer discussion as long as you wish, but please keep it to the 3 minutes that's afforded everybody else.
With that in mind, I'll try. I greatly appreciate you welcoming from outside the community, and I realize that I'm in opposition to the majority on the council when it comes to foofing. I'd like to, 3 things I'd like to share with you, the things I think are good about Grand Forks, my interaction, then with the council. Also discuss about future economic activities, and talk about the First Amendment and freedom of speech as it relates to this. Things that you do well, you're very welcoming to people to speak. Follow up on questions, not so much. Your city employees on their hand, 2 thumbs up. Any questions I had, very professional, have nothing but very good to say. Communication with them has always been excellent. Civil engineering, fantastic. Anybody in the city staff does a tremendous job of civil engineering. Mr. Bean, I would like to thank your leadership through the years, you instilled it. Be specific, give example. I always was told in public speaking. As it relates to civil engineering, you had a young engineer of the city that initially was irritated. He talked about downtown parking spots, maybe some of you remember it. The detail he went to about, you do, right? Initially, I kind of irritated him, and I thought, that's the quality individual you want. If that's somebody who cares that much about painting white paint on black asphalt, he cares about his job, be commended. Again, time is pushing me quicker than, again, you cut me short on your compliments. Things like council, hate crime legislation, fantastic. Stepped up, really proud of that. Another thing, as it relates to the English coulee, environmentally wise, the person that did it, fantastic. Great job, well done. As you can both imagine, now bear with me on this, a hypocrite where I'm from in Stephen, Minnesota, is somebody who's not himself on Sunday. Where am I going with this? You care so much about hate crime legislation, about the environment, and then you engage a company completely opposite of the values you value in the community. You, Mr. Mayor, budget presentation, fantastic. You're excellent at recognizing people. I admire your communication, persuasion skills. As it relates to Fufeng, this is really my heartburn. Everything else, other than it comes to Fufeng, thumbs up. It just seems logical. When it comes to Fufeng, it seems like we're off on a different tangent. Let me switch gears. It's now a smooth transition to First Amendment. I hadn't given much thought to the First Amendment, to what happened when they're denying the citizens' petition. In the First Amendment, it guarantees the right of citizens to assemble peacefully and to petition the government. Right? Why is this so important? For me, if you don't have the freedom of speech, is no good with your grievance to the government without the right to petition. Right? It's like a bicycle with no chain. I can go as fast as I want, pedaling, I'm not going anyplace. I really wish you consider strongly when you deny the citizens' petition. I understand, don't worry, Mr. Gostitz, had conversations with attorney, administrative, legislative, right? There's a pretty big road ditch. If you're gonna err, right, wouldn't you wanna err on the citizens having the right to vote? Elon Musk, right, talks about first principles. Isn't a first principle of democracy a full representation is better than a partial representation, right? You want as many citizens involved as possible. And yet, literally, you look at what 4 members of council can accomplish the way it's structured. It's crazy. Let me ask you this. You can engage an adversary of the United States, a company that has direct links to them. If you look at China and relationship with companies, it really comes down to there's 2 companies in China. There's those that are directly controlled, state-owned, and those that are strongly influenced. Fufeng, it's the latter. So really think about that. If you want more citizens engaged in the government, right, you deny them the right to speak. I've heard about I remember one specific instance that occurred here. Is there any more we can do as a conversation with Mr. Goss and Mr. Weber? And you said absolutely not, there's nothing more we can do. With that, have you ever heard of surveys? Have you ever heard of polling to get a will of the people? You chose not to do that. Again, some of you look like you have a shame on your face, as you should. Again, just please consider. To wrap up here, my final point, and this truly is when I think of Grand Forks, and the cornerstones of Grand Forks, it really means to me, there's 2 things that come to mind. Right, it's UND and Grand Forks Air Force Base, your 2 biggest employers. I would ask, right, that you think about product market fit when you go forward. Right, it's a simple concept. You look at, again, agriculture background, sugar beets fit the region, right, agronomically, economically, then you get an ecosystem built around that. I really think about UND and Grand Forks Air Force Base, right, product market fit. Another example, UND, you think of the Ralph Engelstad Arena, fantastic example, hockey there, right? Bear with me, this list is kind of tough as the NDSU grad. Product market fit, you like this? It's a hat from UND, it's hockey, right? Right, it has an excellent fit on my head in the community. There's 2 companies I think you should look forward to that fit well with UND and fit with Grand Forks Air Force Base, right, to actively recruit them. You might say life beyond Fufeng. The first company, I don't know, have any of you heard of Anduril, right? It's a high-tech company, drones, right, artificial intelligence, border security. Without a doubt in my mind, you would have the North Dakota congressional delegation, the governor, yourself. They have an excellent fit here. They're looking for places to do business, right? The second company is Planetaire, right? Data company, security. If you look at them, excellent fit. You have a lot of wonderful people in Grand Forks. I have family that graduated from UND, classmates are currently serving in the CIA. One thing you take for granted here that you have in spades is you have integrity in your students, in the community. You do not realize, and there's people way more qualified to me to talk about security clearance for individuals. You have that in spades here, right? Make use of that, connect with those companies, both private and public.
It's like hands in a glove. It's like UND and hockey. They go together, an excellent product market fit. So with that, I wish you well. I thank you kindly for me allowing to speak. And here's to all of us making better choices going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Bouclair.
Jody Carlson.
Ms. Carlson, please.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, President Sandy, and the rest of the council members. I've done somewhat of a summary here that I wanted to share with you. I want you to know that for myself, uncovering corruption has not been an easy job, but you all know what's going on behind the scenes. This project is absolutely imploding on you, and you know it. You're in deep, and you need to get out. Secrecy and lies from the beginning. A few of you working on this from the beginning. You said last week when I made the comment that there were just a few of you that have been working on this for a couple years before others even knew about it. And what I was told, and I can't remember whether it was Mr. Phelan or someone else, said that it was the city administration that had been working on it for the last few years. Jean Mock was the vice president of the council. Why was she not involved in that? Also, it was commented by Jeannie Mock, the vice president of the council, learned about the FBI meeting by reading the newspaper. She was not a part of the Good Old Boys Club. Is there any, and this question I would like you to answer, is there any relationship between Fufang and Communist China?
That's what they're looking into. That's what the CFIUS report should tell us, right?
No,
Now,
I'm
our information is that
asking, with the information that is out there and everything that's been shared and everything that we know, is there a thread of connection between Fufang and the CCP?
We know that the chairman at one point worked for the local government.
Okay.
That's what we know.
Okay.
Yes.
On February 22nd, when Mr. Tuderash, who I see he's online there, and I hear that he's in town, and I'm surprised that he's not here, but on February 22nd, when Mr. Tuderash was asked very specifically, is there any connection between Fufang and the CCP? His answer was no. That was not the truth, and that is on video. Your refusal of a vote, despite more than enough validated signatures, you're supposed to represent us. You are elected to represent us. You do not get to decide what you believe is in our best interest. A showstopper that we heard is if Fufang is guilty of forced labor, which they are right now, today, this very day, they are guilty of forced labor because the law was enacted last month. And if they don't have the exemption from the National Border Security, they are guilty. They do not have that exemption and they are guilty. What we heard from the beginning is if they are guilty of forced slave labor, this is a done deal. Is the exemption, and again, on February 22nd, and Mr. Tuderash, if you're with us, maybe you would like to reply, is the exemption filing in place to receive that from the National Border Security?
Ms. Carlson, from my understanding of that law, it relates to importing product from a certain province in China to the United States. The company is not importing product from there to the United States as part of this project.
Have we looked at I can't remember the company that the North Dakota Trade Organization found that was associated with Fufeng that does import. But you will also hear Mr. Chudarash say again at the February 22nd meeting, we do import products, we will continue to import products. We know what's coming at the middle of the year, which is the new Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. He said, and I will do those filings accordingly. So I would like to know, are those filings done?
Well, the federal government will have their say. If that's the case, and they haven't, that's the oversight from the federal government.
Does CFIUS review for the border security? Do they look at the Uyghur forced labor?
I'm not sure if that's in their
Okay.
purview or not, but they have the access to any of the federal entities that they need.
Okay. Another showstopper was if China invades Taiwan. What are we waiting for? Now, China has said, if Pelosi visits Taiwan, we're going to shoot her plane down. And we want to work with a company like that? Are you kidding me?
Well, I
Think about it. And it's not a question for you. I'm just seriously
If you
asking
villainize the
that.
entire country, if that's what you've done by the words from their government, then that's certainly a stance that you can take. I think there's a little bit more nuance in it, and that's what the federal government's going to help us find out.
Did you hear that if Pelosi goes to Taiwan, that China said they are going to shoot her down? Did you hear that on the news? Don't you?
That China said that? Who from China said that?
China what?
China said that? The whole country said that? No.
China said, I'm sorry, I
I'm
didn't.
sorry, I had heard that, yes, ma'am.
Okay, so if you heard that, but yet you continue to move forward with this project in working with this company, and when we look at the Uyghur Forced Labor Act, that's not only forced labor, that's not only slave labor, that's kidnapping of people and putting them in camps. That's harvesting of organs when people are alive. That's genocide, absolutely, thank you. It's genocide. You're putting dollar signs before all of this. Think about it. Another showstopper is, you said, Mr. Volchensky, if you hear from 2 federal government officials that this is not a good idea, you will shut it down. How many federal government officials have we heard from? A lot. And I know you can say we're waiting for CFIUS, yes. But my comment is looking back at the comment that you made about what these showstopper things are. Now, little by little, you're leaking through and saying that they're okay. They're not. And this may be from Mr. Gosted, what rights and legal basis did you act on to take properties from private property owners to accommodate this communist China factory? Do you realize that there were businesses out there, and I have found this out in my research, there were businesses out there in the annexation zone who wanted to protest annexation. And previously, those businesses had requested some type of building permit or whatnot from the city. In order to get that permit, those businesses needed to sign an agreement that they would never petition annexation. So when you receive the petition for, seriously, when you receive the petition for annexation, that property acreage was not included because those people had signed the agreement in order to get a building permit that they would not petition annexation.
Do you have those agreements you could share? Do you have those documents?
Actually, I do have one of them, and I'm sure that Mr. Spicer can get me the rest because he's the one who was working with the people doing the annexation. But I can show you the North Dakota Township law. According to North Dakota Township laws, that type of blackmail is illegal. implied or signed contract that has to do with that those properties would not protest annexation is null and void according to North Dakota Township law. What's with the deal with Fufang now offering to buy Cargill? That's curious. Do they want Cargill as an extra? Do they want Cargill as instead of? I don't know, but I'm throwing out that question. How about Cirrus? Is there a concern about CCP ownership? And have they gone through the Uyghur forced labor exemption?
They're not importing anything into the United States.
Do you know that? Do you know about their supply? Have they been checked out? Is there documentation to prove that?
The federal government's job. That's the federal government's job.
Well, now you can say it's the federal government's job, but what were you doing in the first place? For 2 years, you're moving ahead with all this stuff, and you come to a decision before the citizens even know about it. You've got all your everything in place and ready to go without involving the federal government. And we had a couple people in here, military people, that said you have to notify CFIUS. And you know what? It's no surprise to any of us. CFIUS is out here because of a non-compliance review. And suddenly the city comes up and says, oh, we voluntarily agree to a review. Well, that's a little bit late when CFIUS is already involved with a non-compliance report review. That's what's happening, and I know that.
Can I tell you what happened on that case? Can I
If you'd like to, please.
The only communication we've gotten from CFIUS was through our attorney. The CFIUS had found out about it through reading the newspaper that Bridget Reineking, who was our attorney, formerly worked for CFIUS. That's how they made the first contact. Our contact from CFIUS has only ever been through her.
The first contact was through me.
Okay, please, Ms. Carlson, please, if you can wrap up. I appreciate it.
Again, I would like to see the Uyghur forced labor. I would like to see documentation on Cirrus that they are meeting federal law, and anything in their supply chains is not connected to anything to do with the Xinjiang region and the forced labor issue. And again, any supply chains. You said just this morning, I watched you on Best Source. You said, well, this is how government should work.
Yes,
Is the process that you're going through right now.
What we're going through right now with you talking, I believe, is exactly how it should work. And it may not be pretty, it may be ugly, but I think you having a voice and be able to speak in front of this board is exactly how the government should work.
I have learned from a very young age that the government is by the people and for the people. And you have not involved the people at all. At all. This project has included 3 elected council members. You are making a decision, and when I say elected, that would be excluding Mr. Gosted and Mr. Phelan. The elected officials would include Weber, yourself, and Mr. Sandy, seem to be the good old boys club that have established all this before the knowledge of anyone else even on the council. This project has included 3 elected council members, and you are making a decision that impacts the entire nation. What is your incentive? Do you see that? That the decision that you're making impacts the entire nation? Gosh, you don't have to turn on any news channel at all, and that's what you see. China is buying us up one piece of land at a time. And frequently by Air Force bases, I'm in contact with people down in Texas right now that are going through the same thing. This will be your legacy, Mr. Bochensky. And this will potentially be the end of your career. You also said this morning on the radio, you said, we are leading the nation. I want to tell you that you are not leading anything. You are an embarrassment to our And everybody probably knows what's going on with this ghost FBI person and Sergeant Jennings coming to my house. And you know what? The truth will set you free, and I have not gotten the truth yet. And I want that FBI report. They tell me to go through FOIA to get it, which I have done. Both my husband and myself, we get no response from the police. They're not even talking to us anymore. And you know what, if people would talk to us and if people would tell us the truth of what happened with all that process, that I end up being intimidated, the FBI and the Brantford Criminal Investigation Unit coming to my house, tell me the truth, what happened?
I returned your email.
You did?
This morning, and told you everything that I knew.
And one of the things that you said to smirky Mr. Gosted there, you said Mr. Gosted is the one who ordered the police to be involved. Tell me...
Petitions, in the petitions, yes.
Right, tell me, how does he get that authority to do that?
The departments work together. He had some concerns that he wanted to be solved.
He doesn't have any oversight. He doesn't have any oversight of that. Mr. Gosta, do you supervise the police department?
No, Phelan does.
Okay,
I want to know. I want to know. I want answers to that. On an interview from December 7th, 2020, and again, this was on Best Source. This was you, Mr. Bochensky. You said, quote, "We live in the greatest country in the world. I would never be able to take a knee and look at myself in the mirror. That just doesn't sit right with me." You're taking a knee, Mr. Bochensky.
We were talking about the flags, I believe, at that time in the Kaepernick situation. Is that what that was referring to, that you've twisted into this?
You know what, you were talking about the flag, and you were talking about that you didn't agree with people taking a knee.
Yes.
You weren't going to stand for that because you believed in America. And I want you to know that right now, you are on your knees to China.
That's your opinion, ma'am.
I want to give you...
Please wrap up, Ms. Carlson,
Okay,
please.
I have 4 more just bullet points here.
Okay.
I want to give you a definition of dereliction of duty, and that is the shameful failure to fulfill one's obligations. I want to give you the definition of traitor, and that is a person who betrays a friend, a country, or a principle, someone who sells out to the enemy. Another definition is treason. Legally, this is legally, there are 3 elements to treason. This includes an obligation of allegiance, an intent to violate that allegiance, and an action that violates that obligation. It sounds like this council is involved in treason. A citizen owns sovereignty to the country he lives in. Any person convicted of treason, which actually they said something about death, but forfeits their right to hold any public office in the United States. We elected you all to represent the voices of the community, and we demand to be heard. Do you know what? Throughout this whole country and other countries, they hear us. They're listening to us. They want to hear us, but you don't. Do you watch any of the news channels? What do you hear? You know what it is? It's your community. That's what you hear on national news. You hear your community. This is enough. Fufang must go. Right now, and this is a very important point to please take into consideration, I have read through that entire development agreement as well as the pilot agreement, and the information I have given you all thus far, if you have went back and done any due diligence and studied the points that I have made about those agreements, you know that they are not properly executed. You know that. If you have taken the points I have given on that, you know that those are not valid.
Please.
As I understand, okay, so this is the point I have to make.
Please.
That right now, at this very time, according to the development agreement, you have some outs. You have some outs with an ability to get into that letter of credit and have things paid for. Right now, according to that, you do have some outs and you are able to get paid back for them. As I understand from the development agreement, if this issue goes to a vote of the people and the people vote it down, Fufang walks away with no money due to you.
I don't believe that's true. First of all, the development agreement, you do not need a development agreement for a company to come and operate a business here. This is something that we want to do to give us more oversight and more financial protection. Without a development agreement does not stop the project. The development agreement gave us 20 conditions where we could stop the project as we're going through the due diligence. So this company could have came without a development agreement. That did not need to happen. We did that so we had more oversight and more financial protection. It was the right thing to do as we worked through this due diligence process, which has taken 9 months and will likely take another 9 months.
So is that $5 million letter of credit, is that in the bank?
They have two options. It's the bank, yeah, we can draw on it. They provide that letter of credit to the bank for $5 million, and if they violate the development agreement, we have access to that money to cover our expenses through this due diligence phase.
And this is an Asian bank, and you know, people are standing in line at the bank because they can't get their money out.
This bank is located in New York.
I'd be very concerned about that.
In New York City, this bank is located in.
You know, I really am just floored that you just continue to defend this. And I have a dear friend who's sitting in the audience out here somewhere who told me at one time that this issue is either due to incentive or incompetence. Through my research, Smiley Gosted.
Okay, Ms. Carlson, please wrap up.
Through my research, I have come to believe it's actually both. I think we have some incompetent people making decisions, and we also have some people that are incentivized some way, whether it be financial or whether it be political. There is some type of incentive involved in this for you, and you need to stop.
Thank you, Ms. Carlson.
Ben Gradulewski.
Mr. Gradulewski, please.
Evening, guys. Thanks for having me again.
Okay. Please, sir, Mr. Gradulewski, please.
First off, I just think I wanted to say that since we disclosed that we're voluntarily doing the CFIUS agreement, I think that all work should stop. I think it's in your best interest to stop, in the city's best interest and your guys' best interest. You know, further laying out money and doing studies and surveys and whatnot just implies that we know the outcome, and we don't. So I think it's in everyone's best interest to shut that thing down for a while until we get the answer on our CFIUS review. Second of all, on the water issue, Ken Dean hit it exactly. There's 25 million people that get their water from Lake Mead. They didn't get their studies right. They're in a 1,200-year drought. 1,200 years. And sorry, Mr. Sandy, to call you out, but you're talking about it like it's not a possibility. It happened less than 100 years ago. They cannot predict the weather. When you ask if he can predict if we're in a drought or a drought is coming, they can't predict that. They didn't know it was coming last summer. And you saw what happened last summer, and it only took a few months to get there. They cannot predict it. Weather is changing. There is no normal anymore. So what may have been a huge drought in the 30s is going to be nothing compared to what's coming now. I think everybody needs to think of that. And finally, it's been stated several times, this is a national issue. Everybody in America is watching what is happening in Grand Forks, North Dakota, and it's not because of the flood of '97 anymore. We have a chance to stop this and turn it around, And you guys can fix this and make yourselves kind of come out good, sort of. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Godlewski.
Bonnie Leek.
Mr. Leek, please.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. To start with, I'd like to comment on Ms. Carlson's concept. In their 2020 annual report to investors, Fu Feng said they have a 30% interest in COFCO, in Chinese state-owned company, through their subsidiary Jingling Costco. Therefore, if they are engaging, if Costco is engaging in trafficking or slave or forced labor in Xinjiang, Fu Feng by implication could be placed on if the President of the United States and the Secretary of Treasury, in consultation with the Secretary of Defense, they could sanction Fu Feng for being associated with slave labor through the Sanctions Act through the Department of Treasury. And not only that, they could be pursued under the Protected Victims Trafficking Act, the Traffic Victims Protection Act, through the auspices of the Alien Tort Act that was promulgated back in 1790 by Thomas Jefferson in order to address international law. Okay, so all I go on to say is that because of all these problems, maybe you could consider the option you could have if the new bill that's in front of the Senate proposed to become law, the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, which provides for turbine manufacturing. Either we make the blades, why not manufacture the turbines? Maybe somebody could pull some strings to get a turbine factory, a wind turbine factory. Okay, so that's just extra. What I came to originally to say was that it seems like you have a lot of problems with risk. Risk with drought, climate change, risk with water quality. The last time I was here, the engineer said that their models for waste management, reductions of odor, et cetera, were not being able to be modeled properly to their liking. It seems to me that you have a problem with Murphy's Law, that what can go wrong might go wrong, or the color will go wrong. Now I'd like to harken back 42 years to the Grand Forks Air Force Base when the B-52 caught on fire with a plutonium-filled weapon in it. If the wind would have been blowing in the opposite direction, you wouldn't be here today. None of us would be here today because the plutonium scattered across the countryside. How far, who knows?
They fought that fire for 13 years.
So risk is very problematic. So if you're going to go ahead and risk all this tax incentives for Fu Feng, then maybe you should reconsider the risk involved if things fail and you have odor or the water that runs out, and what are you going to do then, you know? So I like to be finished with an eclectic thing, somewhat obscure. I'm going to do a dramatic surrogate of the city council. No personalities are implied to any of the people on the council, but this is by George Orwell in Animal Farm. And to framework this statement, the pigs were the people that were in charge of the other animals. And I'll just say it this way, or I'll turn so Mr. Weber can see me, that the pigs said to the audience, us people animals, comrades, they cried, the pigs cried, you do not imagine, I hope, that we pigs are doing this in the spirit of selfishness and privilege? Many of us actually dislike milk and apples, the milk and apples being Fu Feng's tax breaks. I dislike them myself. Our sole object is taking these things is to preserve our health. Milk and apples, this has been proven by science, comrades, contain substances absolutely necessary for the well-being of a pig. We pigs are brain workers. The whole management and organization of this farm depends on us. Day and night we are watching over your welfare. It is for your sake that we drink the milk and eat the apples. George Orwell, Animal Farm.
Thank you, Mr. Leake.
Allison Spicer.
Ms. Spicer, please.
Good evening to everyone here and to everyone watching. I would like to apologize to all the people out there watching that you did turn off the comments. Very rude. I would like to start by saying that I'm a very, very proud American. I pray to God every day that I have the freedoms that I do, because I know there's many people around the world that do not have the freedoms that every single one of us get to enjoy. I was going to try to be polite this evening, but I just can't. For anyone out there who believes bringing Fufeng Ltd. to Grand Forks is a good idea, it's not. You are a disgrace to our community. You're a disgrace to our military. You're a disgrace to our state. You're a disgrace to our wonderful country. And most of all, you're a disgrace to our veterans who have fought for our freedom. It seems to me that this project has been very strategically placed. Miles away from an interstate and a highway, 13 miles away from the Grand Forks Air Force Base, 44 miles away from the land that Bill Gates just bought from Campbell Farms, 91.5 miles away from the Cavalier Air Force Base. Yes, Dana, that is definitely less than 100 miles. How do we really know what Fufeng Ltd. will producing here? Did you know that 11,000 pounds of fentanyl made its way into the United States from China? The dominant source of illegal fentanyl has been from Mexico. The drug is manufactured in illegal labs there from Asia, mainly the People's Republic of China. In the year 2020, there were over 56,000 opioid overdose deaths in the United States, primarily from fentanyl. Did you also know that China is in the top 3 countries for human trafficking? Very strategic placing. They have over 3.2 million victims every single year. And last but not least, Mr. Hoven and Mr. Burgum, do not for 1 minute think that North Dakota believes you are not behind this. Mr. Hoven, you have been trying to get China into our state for years. And Mr. Burgum, it has only taken a few short years to prove the same. Mr. Hoven, Mr. Burgum, Bill Gates, and Fufeng, it is time for all of you to get out of my state.
Grant Schiller.
Mr. Schiller, please.
Thank you, Mayor Buczynski, members of City Council. It's a pleasure to be here today. I came here today not for the purpose of speaking. I didn't intend to be here to do that. I just came here to educate and to learn and to show support to what I feel is a very, very worthy cause. As some of you know, I am a retired Grand Forks Police Lieutenant of 21 years. I've served this city during that time, including the flood of '97 when did a lot of build back and a lot of water mitigation. Also been on farm around long enough to know what a drought looks like and how bad that is. And my father claiming he could walk across the Red River on dry land. And to hear the water report, we go back and watch it again. It's scary. I'm not about to sit up here and reiterate all the points that you already know in media and in your heart. You know right from wrong. And I'm not up here to by any means speak on behalf of our police. I do not speak for them anymore. I did it one day, and I used to sit back there and protect these council chambers just as they are here today serving you. And I was privileged and honored to do that for the city because I loved it. And I'm grateful for that opportunity and for what it did for me and my family who still live here, and my grandchildren are here now. And when I see things through the eye of a police officer, it comes down to what we talked about: risk assessment, threat assessment, cost of benefit, and most importantly, if it's predictable, it's preventable. Michael Durant was a guy that coined that phrase, and I heard it from him personally when I attended the FBI National Academy several years ago. He was the gentleman who went down in the movie Black Hawk down in that terrible fight. That was the biggest takeaway I got from them, and many other lessons along the way. So, just from a tactical point, or perspective, if you will, you hear these compelling arguments, and I pray for you, for God to give you the wisdom and the courage to do what's right. We all stood for the flag. We still stand here as patriots for that flag right there. Many people have come before us and have given greater sacrifice. And I pledge for this country and for our town, for the city of Grand Forks, the cost of benefit, folks, is not here. If I was in command, I would say stand down now. Stand down. Don't take this any further. And may God be with you, and thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Spicer, please.
Good evening, council. There's so many things here that I could address that it would take us a couple hours. I know I get a few minutes. Let's start with where we're at right now with China and the state of our country and their country. Can I ask each one of you a question? Would you consider China a friend, an adversary, or an enemy, Mr. Bien?
Mr. Spicer, if you got comments, please.
That's a comment. It's a question.
It's a comment,
You
please.
should answer my question so people know how you feel about this instead of being hypocrites, can't even say it, you got me that wild, hypocrites about this whole matter. You sit there and you preach that you want to do the Pledge of Allegiance to the United States of America, but yet you are in bed with the Chinese because they are either profiting from this and someone else is profiting or whatnot. So how can you sit there and not answer the question? Okay, are you friends with China? Are they our adversary or are they our enemy right now?
Mr. Spicer.
For you, Mr. Boccia. No, you have to answer this question.
I'm answering you right now.
Mr. Coachman, listen, I go back to Mr. Coachman. Have you answered any questions? Do you wonder why you look like you are under the microscope that nobody wants to believe anything you say? Everything that I see about this project is red flags, red flags, red flags. Pollution, traffic. It's going to cost the citizens of this town more money than they can endure. Okay? Which one of you people has ever gone down that road where this plant's going to be built?
I think a lot of us has driven down 27th.
You think a lot of us? Let's answer that question.
I don't think that's the case.
Is that one too indicative of what's going on? Let's answer the question.
Please keep your tone a little bit louder,
Dana Sandy.
Mr. Spicer.
Mr. Fang. Is that your code name now, Mr. Fang? Can you answer the question? How about this question? In the last 15 years, would this be a fair question to say that you had made your living with the Chinese government involved? Is that a fair question? Yeah. Without China, would you be where you are today?
No.
Yes.
No.
You would?
No.
So China had nothing to do with your career? Okay, I'll leave you there shaking your head and lying again like you always do. Mr. Kavami, are we friends with China? Should we be doing this business, or do you think that they're probably gonna take over Taiwan very soon? Do you watch the news? No, can't answer me. Anybody else? You're new, I'm sorry, I put you on the spot, Ms. Lewinsky. What do you think?
So are you friends with every person in this room?
Am I friends?
So how can you judge China?
I don't care if I'm friends with anybody in this room. I'm standing up for my country. Okay, and I know for a fact that you and your husband are probably involved in this, that somehow or another connects to pay this person and pay. That's the trouble with this whole process that I found out, is it's so interconnected with the planning and zoning, with the EDC, everybody that's involved is connected to somehow or another come out. Mr. He's gone now, Sean Getty, AE2S, how much money do you suppose they gain to profit from this project? But yet we sit here and we take all of their advice. Last week he was here and he's going through all the processes that are going to stop the smell from this company. I can tell you right now by the track record of all the companies in this town that they will not stop the smell no matter how many processes they go through, okay? Because we've been smelling the bee plant for how many years? 40 years. They are still trying to accomplish a way to stop smell. Simplot is having trouble right now. They've spent millions to stop smell, odor, pollution. They're having trouble right now. It's still, come with me, let's go for a drive. Let's go smell Simplot. Let's go smell Red River Bio right now, who has been shut down for 2 months. Okay, I can tell you right now, you won't like it, because I go by there just about every day. Okay, if it doesn't affect you and it doesn't affect you, let's just stick it on everybody else and say it's okay, for the good of the city. No, not hardly at all. That's not true. This issue came to you 5 or 6 months ago. My wife and I approached you and asked you to bring this to a city forum and bring it out in the open. What happened to that, Mr. Bochinski?
We've had, I don't know.
Oh, no.
15.
Was there a city forum that invited Grand Forks to attend?
Mr. Spicer.
Answer the question, yes or no?
15 different meetings here.
That's you spilling out the bias propaganda.
Settle down.
No, I am settled down.
Thank you.
You go ahead.
No, I just need a tone that's more
the mayor
decorum.
who I consider conflicted in this thing, spewing out information that tends to predict what everybody thinks is going to happen and going to be okay. It's not going to be okay. I don't care what you say on the radio, what talk show you go on, what thing that you pat yourself on the back that you think is such a great thing for, it's not.
Okay, Mr. Spicer, do you have any comments to wrap up?
No,
Please.
I have more questions.
This is the citizen.
I want to know,
please,
I want to know from each council member, what's going to be the end result when this thing hits, okay? Right now, we're declaring that we're going to have all this water, and Mr. Sandy has this weather crystal ball. He can't predict the weather no more than the weather people can 3 days from now, okay? So, we're talking about this water, okay? So what if we can bring in this 6.6 million gallons of water every day? Does that mean we should let them pollute our water, pollute our air? Okay, let alone, let's jeopardize our air base beyond any fact that we should even go there because of what that's going to do to our city, our air base, and our state. But yet, blindly, we sit here and just keep pushing this project on. What do you know that we don't know that we should know because there's something crooked about this whole thing?
Anything else, Mr. Spicer?
I'm sorry, what?
Do you have any other comments this evening, Mr. Spicer, please?
None that you're going to attend to, just like I've been here for 6 months, because you won't answer any questions, because you're afraid to put yourself on the line.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Spicer.
Thank you, Mr. Bochinski. I hope you don't run next time.
Do you have any other comments this night? All right. Thank you. We're moving on to the item 7. I'm sorry, the citizen comment period's been closed, ma'am.
I have something from your city inspector.
Ma'am, excuse me, you're disrupting the meeting right now. We are moving on to item 7.
I'm going to send it to you when I'm done because it's what the city inspector.
Approval of minutes and bills. Excuse me, sir. We are running a meeting, a public meeting.
Excuse me.
Sir, the citizen comment period is closed. We are running a public meeting which you are disrupting right now. Mr. Patrick, could you please sit down, sir? Please.
I've got something to take care of. I just want to give you some information. Can I just do that and get out of here?
Mr. Patrick, you need to sit down. If you've got information, feel free to reach out at another time or after the meeting, please. Thank
Okay.
you, sir. Item 7, approval of minutes and bills.
7.1 is the vendor list and engineer's estimate.
Thank you. Excuse me, sir. You're disrupting the meeting.
You're disrupting. What's wrong with you? You are disrupting our town and our country. Yeah. Why are you not getting?
Excuse me, ma'am. You're disrupting a public meeting.
What are you not?
We're moved on to items. This is no longer citizen comment period. Please keep yourself quiet as we finish the meeting. Thank you. Ms. Storstad, please read off item 7.1.
7.1 is the vendor list and engineer's estimate. Thank you.
We got a motion to approve the vendor list. Do we have a second? We got a second from Ms. Lunsky. Any further comment? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. That item is approved. That motion is approved. Item 7.2.
Minutes from April 4th.
Anyone get a chance to read the minutes?
Move approval.
We got a motion from President Sandy, a second from Mr. Kavami. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item number 8, Mr. Phelan, do you have any comments this evening? No. Item number 9, Mayor and council members, any comments this evening? Mr. Weigel.
No, thank you, ma'am.
Ma'am, you are disrupting a public meeting. Please stop.
I think it needs to be disrupted.
Please stop. This is not your period. Please, ma'am.
This is what?
Ma'am. Mr. Weigel, this is the time for the city council members to make comments. Please respect that.
No, thank you, Mayor.
Well, you can respect
Ms. Osowski,
everything to a vote.
any comments? Mr. Weber, is he online? Okay. Ms. Lunsky, any comments this evening? Okay. Mr. Kavami, any comments? Mr. Veen, any comments this evening? Mr. Sandy? All right, once again, I do appreciate the decorum, and I appreciate everyone that comes and speaks, but you have to have proper decorum for a public meeting. Please continue to reach out. Please continue to speak. Please continue this process, but do so in a manner that's respectable for a public meeting. I think that is a pretty simple ask, and that's all that I ask tonight. So I wish everybody has a good evening and has a good week. I look for a motion to adjourn. Got a motion to adjourn from President Sandy and a second from Ms. Lunsky. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
That's it.
We are adjourned.
Mr. Kaczynski, I want to know why you helped move Food Bank into the Innovation Center, why you were there. They said you were helping when the Food Bank group moved